Not Quite Right features discussions that are unfiltered and uncensored and may include themes that are inappropriate for younger listeners. Also, I swear a lot.
Something doesn't seem quite right.
Welcome to Not Quite Right. My name is Ed.
And I'm Amanda.
Or should I say, you're being welcomed to Not Quite Right by us.
Please don't.
So this is the Longlist episode for the July 2025 Not Quite Right prize.
Yes.
And you know what it is by now. This is actually our 8th Longlist episode.
Oh my God.
So I've been doing this for a while now.
Yeah. Well, as always, I'm very excited. I've been gearing up for this all day and I've been at soccer, the kids' soccer, ready to come here and ready to do this. This is my soccer. Do you know what I mean?
Right.
So
Did anyone give you a baby? Your soccer?
That's a
deep cut.
That's a deep cut. Greener grass reference from our previous episode. But forget that. Come on. Let's get into it.
All right. So let's explain for the newbies what this episode's going to entail. And what we do is we'll spend hopefully less than 2 hours.
Oh, good luck.
Going through the submission stats from this round, Q&A, including your voicemails, your tweets, your other comments. We'll discuss the prompts and share some of our favourite responses. And we'll also be speaking with our assistant judge, Dean, very shortly, who is going to share his thoughts on this round with us as well. And finally, at the end of the episode, we will be reading the long list out. So you can skip ahead if you really can't wait, but we would always recommend coming back and listening because there's a lot of good information that we'll share with you in this episode. A lot of shout outs, and we'll be shouting out names that are not necessarily in the long list. So if you do hear your name being shouted out during the episode, that does not necessarily mean that you made the long list. So hang around till the end of the episode for that. And then once we're done, the next episode that's coming in a week's time will be the shortlist episode where we'll be reading all of the stories on the shortlist in full, as well as announcing the winner of this round's prize.
I know who it is.
And then on the heels of the shortlist episode will come our Daredevil episodes. 5 Daredevils this round, each with their own episode. So we'll be reading one story per episode and then breaking it down, sharing our thoughts.
Possibly breaking down the author in the process as well.
All right, so this episode, look forward to a lot of passive voice, a lot of setting things on fire, and a lot of cranes. Now, Amanda, did you know that if you fold 1,000 cranes, you get to make a wish?
If I didn't know it before, I know it now.
My personal wish is that we finish recording before 3 a.m. So let's see how that goes.
And I just want to say a big hello to all the newbies as well, because of course we love our OGs and we love the people who have been with us along this journey, but there are quite a few newbies here. And it's probably also worth mentioning that one newbie made it all the way to the shortlist on their first attempt. So welcome, welcome. But if it helps, 2 OGs, and I'm talking way back in 2023, made it to the shortlist as well.
Very excited to talk about them in the next episode.
I can't wait.
All right, so let's get to the stats. So first of all, this was our biggest round since our very first free round a couple of years ago, which is amazing. The people are loving the comp and wanting to take part. So we had 340 entries from 16 countries this time around. We had 38% from Australia.
Still the top.
34% from US. And 13% from the UK, which is really similar to past rounds. So that makes up, look, I'm no mathematician, as you say, but that's like 80% or something. And then little smatterings from all over the world. We've got entrants from Austria, Brazil, Canada, Denmark, Germany, Ireland, Isle of Man, Japan, Malaysia, New Zealand, Norway, Slovenia, Sweden, and one entrant from Switzerland. So hello to everyone around the world. So gender stats. As always, the women far outnumber the men.
This as round, it should be.
This round we had 69% female.
Nice.
24% male, 4% non-binary, and 2% other, prefer not to say. And the female ratio there has actually gone up. Okay. So last round it was 64 and now 69. So that's a whole extra 5%. Don't know if we're alienating men or just attracting more women. Either way, you're cool with it.
I love men. Hashtag not all men.
And so age, like our average and also our median or whatever the peak of the curve is at 42, right about where we are. That's where you are.
That's where I am. You're a little bit.
I'm a little bit on the
Ahead of the
older
curve.
side in my beekeeping years, I like to say. So our youngest entrant this time round was 15 years old.
Okay.
So hopefully they had permission from their parents to enter.
Yes, because no doubt there will be some themes.
But our oldest was 80.
All right,
So that's
nice.
quite the range.
And competing on equal footing, really.
Yeah. So the total number of words this round that we read was 163,821, which is about the same number of words as Frankenstein by Mary Shelley.
Okay.
And our shortest entry this time round was Je saute by Kellen Hrixo at only 96 words.
Oh, baby entry.
One other thing I'd like to mention is just the timing of the first submission. So, like in the past, we've gotten entries 15 minutes after we've kicked off, which is always a bit suspicious. This time around, I was very pleased to see that we didn't get any entries until 10:36 on the Friday was the first one. So that's 10 and a half hours later, which is, enough time to write a story, develop it.
Oh, there's definitely people doing it in less than that at the end of the...
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, I mean, always take as much time as you need and take the full 2 days. But, maybe that person was going away. Who
got
knows?
shit on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, very pleased to see that no one just kind of rushed it or
That's great.
rehashed old content, which is good.
It's also a win if you even get a submission in, right? Because plenty of people don't. And it's what we call a DNF, or a did not finish. And we've both been there. You start an entry and you're just not feeling it, or something comes up or whatever it might be, and you don't get it over the line. So well done to everybody who got it over the line, basically. And one person who commented on social media about this was CJ Paling, who did DNF this round and who posted on Blue Sky that their new writing goals were to finish the draft, even if it's draft 0, submit the draft, any draft, and get mentioned on the podcast. So well done for getting mentioned despite not actually making it in this round. But it happens to all of us. And in fact, in the background, I've been talking to some of the other competition runners about this issue of DNFing, because we want to support riders to get it over the line.
Yep.
And it's not always possible, but I think there's a lot of times when it is possible and we just need that little bit of extra boost. So I've been talking with them, and I'm hoping to put together another little article about like how to handle the risk of a DNF, basically, and how to hopefully overcome it. And I guess support you all to at least get something over the line. But on that note, there were some people who did get their entries over the line, but who then were disqualified.
Yes, we had 5 DQs this round, which is, I think, a record probably.
Yeah, it's a record. And it's such a shame. So all of them were on the word prompt, and they're probably going to be shocked to realise that when they go back into their story, they didn't actually use the word crane. So 3 of them had the word craning instead of crane, which is so disappointing. And look, I don't want to be anal about that, but at the end of the day, the rule's there for a reason. And if we get too flexible on that, it becomes very difficult to, I guess, compare the stories. One spelled it out as C.R.A.N.E. And again, it's quite clear in the rules, including in the email that you get with the prompts, that you can't have any interrupting punctuation, which includes those dots. So capital letters as an acronym, sure, but unfortunately it is a disqualification if you use that interrupting punctuation. And then there was one story where in the brief explanation field that the author had mentioned all these different crane references in the story, like this person, a historical figure whose name was Crane, and all these things, but the actual story didn't have the word crane in it. So I don't know if that was a misunderstanding, but unfortunately the word was missing. And it was a disqualification. So just be careful on that, because I know we're super flexible usually on prompt interpretation, certainly on the anti-prompt interpretation. But at the end of the day, we do need to just have that rule there just to help us check through that. Unfortunately for those authors, but anyway, a lesson hard learned, I guess. But it may be appropriate to just move on to the next thing, which is just a very, very brief revival of my favourite, which is the swearing stats.
So what made you decide to bring this back from the dead?
You know.
Was it the C-bomb?
It was the C-bomb. So we get plenty of swearing. Honestly, I've encouraged it.
Yeah.
So, and we get it in the titles of the stories.
Yeah.
I think this is authors letting loose, because other comps are maybe not so swearing friendly, and you're letting loose, and I welcome that. But yeah, a record number of C-bombs. So I think the most we've ever had before was 1. How many C-bombs did we receive this time? Do you know?
I would say, look, I couldn't tell you, maybe 3.
4.
4.
4, and I'm going to say and a half, or maybe it's 4 and a quarter, because one person made a joke referencing it, but deleted, like censored the word, but I
Yeah.
know what the word was.
Yeah. You know what we could do? We could just make that the word next round. The word prompt.
and then
we'd get
hopefully
hundreds of them.
hundreds binders.
Binders full of C-bombs.
So, it's always welcome. And they were all appropriately used, I felt, as well.
All right. Well, I'm not going to make a segue between the C-bomb and our next segment, which is a conversation with Dean. Dean was our guest judge this time around and also for the last round. Let's call him and see what he has to say.
Ring-a-ding-ding.
Hello.
Thank you for helping us out with judging this round. How'd you find it?
It was different. I don't know if you guys found it different this time, now that I've got one to compare to. I was thinking about it a bit earlier on, and I actually think this round, maybe the way the prompts worked, I feel like I read a lot more serious stories or more sort of emotional stories. I'm not saying there wasn't comedy for sure, but just in terms of comparing to last round, in terms of the judging, I felt like personally I had fewer, maybe at the very tippity top end standouts. However, in terms of the long list contender stories, I call that the middle class. The middle class felt like it grew a little bit bigger. But like me, it sort of grew around the middle a lot more.
No, well, I really agree. Like, it felt like the standard was raised. I don't know if it's whether we're all learning together or whether the prompts were easier or what good reason was for that. I was wondering as well whether maybe, we provided a little bit of advice around the anti-prompt this time, and it felt like maybe people didn't go quite as hard on it, and they were prioritizing the quality of the story rather than maybe getting too lost in the anti-prompt. And I think that was great. Like, I think it did show itself in the stories that came through that they were quite polished and quite good.
I agree. I think there were still people who went very, very hard.
True.
on some of them.
It's true.
And when you go hard on passive voice, it can be a lot. But yeah, there was definitely some fun get-arounds in terms of literal ways to do the prompts, which are always a lot of fun, as well as the classic sort of faithful ways. And I think people were a little bit more on top of how to faithfully go about executing the anti-prompt this time.
I feel like as well that this time it was much more thematic. Like, we got a lot of stories that had similar themes, similar concepts and like premises to each other. A lot of those around the crane prompt and the burning prompt, which we didn't necessarily have so many of those last time around.
That's true. And you mentioned premises. There was a lot of burning down of premises as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
There was a lot of house fires. No, I think you're right. I mean, it definitely looked into, there was a lot of studies of grief. I saw that a lot, which I think exactly what you say, the prompts maybe prompted people to, I mean, the passive side of things for sure, but also, the burning, there was a lot of different actions that were coming through there. And the crane, I don't know, maybe it's a more serious animal than a seal. All right, so we're ready for some shout-outs?
Yeah, bring it on.
All right, I wish I could shout out more. I definitely made a lot of notes throughout the whole judging. All right, so let's look at that first prompt, which was crane. You'll get into the stats later, but we had sort of craning a neck, and we had the bird, obviously. Paper cranes definitely featured. The heavy machinery, that you drive around. I'll tell you what there wasn't. There was no Fraser or Niles crane, which was
how sad.
Which I was quite sad about.
Is that spelled with a K though?
No, it was.
You're thinking of
Kramer
Cosmo
was
Kramer.
with a K.
Yeah, it must be.
Is that who you're thinking of? Different 90s show. So they weren't there. But we did have another one. There was the Crane's Bill flower. Do you guys might have seen a few of those? There were some other fun ones. Now, I'm not sure exactly how you say it, but it's Aegicrane, so Aegicrane. That's a classical ornament of a ram or goat head or skull, an Aegicrane. And believe it or not, there was two stories that went with that.
What?
Not just the one. Yeah, so one was The Lycanthrope of Holly Lane by former winner Torrinell, but also the story That the People May Live by Joseph Blakemore. So they already were on the same wavelength.
Just goes to show how hard it is to be original.
Yeah.
Well, exactly, because there's also another word which popped up twice, which was bucranes, which is B-U-C-R-A-N-E, and they're very similar, but this time it's an ox head ornament. So we saw that also in two more stories. So it must be related, the suffix, in a story called 6:52 p.m. by A.Z. and Confluences of Tea and Bone by Ellie Scott. So
would it be a cranium thing, right, if it's heads?
It must be, yeah, because that seems to be the skull or head. Now, other things. There was a beautiful little story, which I really loved. The geography nerd in me appreciated the misspelling of the country Ukraine in the story by a child. Y-O-U and then crane. It's a sweet little tale. Two people in a library drawing with maps. And that story was You and Me versus the World by Claire Sandys.
Yeah, and you know, you say it's hard to be original, but that was original.
Another one was Crane versus Crane. One of them was the right spelling, and one was C-R-A-I-N by Penny A. Nichols. In that story, the character spends the story trying to correct the spelling of her surname, which has been spelled incorrectly, which I thought was kind of funny. Crane also featured in those arcade claw machines, you know, the claw. So we saw that a few times.
Which I hadn't heard of before, having that being called the crane game.
Yeah.
I wasn't familiar with that.
Is it a UK
I was
thing?
calling it a claw game, but you're from elsewhere, Dean, so maybe you've heard that.
Well, here in Australia, I think you're right. We call it sort of the claw game. Well, I guess in Toy Story, it's the claw as well. But you could understand with these, there were 3 stories that kind of incorporated that I saw.
Oh, totally
They
fits.
made it very clear what it was.
Yeah.
One of those stories was Natalie Busco's story, The Tapestry of You, and also Clawing a Way Out by J.I. Locatelli, and Linda Atkins' intense story. Not intense, not camping, but intense.
Intense.
The citadel has been burned to the ground. Actually, that had a really great line that incorporated it. It was covetously, like I'm a bauble, he half grips with a crane in a crazed neon arcade. One other crane, which I thought was very funny, was as a yoga position in the hilarious Have You Tried Manifesting Self-Worth by Jack Lewis Edney. This story had a really good opening paragraph. I don't know if you guys remember it, but I'd like to share it with you now.
Go ahead.
The heat was burning from Meryl's crotch, refusing to relent. If she wasn't released from this flowering lotus position by that bendy snake-faced bitch, she'd swear off yoga and accept her fate as a beached whale on Susan's 40th. I thought that was a very fun visual image.
Oh, okay. and a fun use of the burning prompt there as well.
Well, yes, exactly. Fun use of burning. In fact, that ties very nicely into the burning prompt. Yeah, this was actually spread a little bit more evenly, so to speak. Moving on from the yoga. As I said earlier, we had arson, accidental burnings of houses or buildings. There was a lot of those. We saw bushfires and campfires. We had burning of those paper cranes because there were a few of those. And then just a lot of general lighting candles, matches and cigarettes. There was plenty of those that popped up throughout the story because that's often, especially lighting a cigarette's a very, very noir sort of thing to do.
Yeah, there were definitely more cigarettes this round than you would normally find.
That is true. Burning Desire, I quite liked. That popped up a few times. And so did Burning Cheeks to show embarrassment, which is always nice when you can kind of do that show don't tell thing, the burning cheeks. But then we also had a whole bunch of food being burnt, like burnt toast. Burning CDs. That excited me so much when I saw people burning CDs. I'd forgotten all about burning CDs. The first story I read of that was just delightful. It was called Track 12, Born to Make You Happy, Britney Spears by Christy Hartman. But also we saw a story called For Alice by Jessica Chloe O'Day, and that had a lovely line about a crane actually as well in it, which was it would take a crane to carry this responsibility. So I thought that was a nice figurative use of the word crane as well while we're talking about it. We also saw a DVD being burned as well. So not just CDs, we were going forward in time a little bit. There was a story by Luna Delaval called Twitcher.final_02 in classic kind of file naming conventions. The one I thought I thought we would see more of was calories being burned.
Okay.
I was very surprised that we didn't have too many of them.
You hope you're going to burn calories and then it doesn't happen. So I feel like it's fitting.
And then I realised it's totally fitting because we told them not to be active.
Yes, well, good point.
It did appear in a story called Gym Sesh by Kerry Goldsworthy. That's one that popped out. So that was there. Ears, my Kiwi accent, ears were burning from Gossip in Passive Aggressive by Sheridan Bell. And also there was some burning questions, which I thought was also a cool way to do it. There was actually Anne-Marie Cofield, her story was a burning question. And there was also the same burning question in Hand Over Hand by Maureen R.M. Lane.
And you know what? I really love that because I know entering, and I'm thinking of New York City Midnight in particular, and the way that action prompts are used in that competition is quite strict.
Yep.
And it's fine. Like, that's part of the rules of that competition. But you have to have that action very clearly in the body of your story. And I feel like some of those more creative takes might be a little bit frowned upon in that competition, which again is fine, it's part of their rules. But I like that we can get all those different takes.
Oh, we love them.
Yeah, I love it so much, and just having a bit of originality. And it's like, it's not all about that, but it's nice for us as judges to get that variety and to see the different ways people approach it, because of course that can inspire you to write quite different stories as well.
It definitely does. You want variety? How about a burning penis and a burning vagina?
That sounds like a very indecent proposal there.
It does, doesn't it? Yes.
Is that your go-to pickup line?
I mean, yeah, we had burning hair, we had burning skin, but yes, these particular ones, Dongzilla and the Doomed Bridal Shower by Kevin S., that featured a burning penis, and I Still Don't Like Swimming by Kathy Prokovnik had the burning vagina, very specifically stated. So, yes. That lateral thinking enough for you, mate?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, yeah, I'm glad to have it in this competition.
Not in real life.
Yeah. We had a lot of stories that started with the aftermath of a fire. Often it was a house fire. One story I thought did it quite well was Tiny Houses by Christina Wilson, because this story sort of froze the action where everyone is at the moment of the fire beginning, and we sort of get to zoom into all the different parts of the house, and there was some nice parallels. There was a sort of doll's house featured as well. So I thought that was sort of a clever take on something that we did see a lot of in terms of house fires and the aftermath of a fire.
Yeah, that was a memorable story for me. I thought that was really, really cool concept.
Another one that was memorable on my list was Burning of IDs. It was central to the plot of The Molten Detritus of Grifter's Past by Lincoln Hayes. This played out in a really fun way. Great narrative voice too. Good use of flashbacks as a con man's reflecting on his past identity. So that was a really nice way to build the action into kind of a core part of the plot. And things like burning bodies, cremations, and funeral pyres. That was another way we saw burning take place. One story, Feathers on Pyres by Autumn Battinger, had a great line. He thought of his mum, her gentle laughter, the beeps and drips that became the chorus of her last days. As I said, we saw a lot of people talking about grief through the stories. So naturally, the cremation or crematoriums or any kind of funeral pyre, that made sense for those kind of stories, I guess, a lot of the time.
And I've actually been to the Ganges and seen some of those funeral pyres, and it is quite a memorable experience to witness that. So that story definitely took me back to that time as well. It's very sensory experience, you might say. Well, there's people being carried through the streets as well. So when you're walking nearby, like there's just family members who have passed away being carried high on people's shoulders basically through the streets. And it's, confronting for someone, in this country, death is much more sort of hidden away.
Well, on the subject of burning people, one last shout out from the burning corner of the judging column was this excellent opening line from Cleansing Fire by Exeter Stevens. A man's attention is instantly captured when you douse him in gasoline. That got my attention as a judge as well. It's a great opening line.
Just wondering if that was like a method acting kind of situation. Like, is this coming from real experience or is this hypothetical?
That's true. We wonder how many of these stories are based on real life experiences.
Maybe that's the thing. How everyone jokes about like your Google search history as an author? Like maybe if your Google search history is how to murder people, you're fine. And if it's not in your Google search history, like you've been doing it in real life.
That means you've scrubbed your history.
Or it means you've just got a life experience instead of having to Google it.
Yes, it brings new meaning to show, don't tell.
Yes, exactly.
All right, are you guys ready for anti-prompt stuff?
Bring it on.
Go for it.
Well, as I said, turns out writing in an actor voice is actually quite a good thing. Who knew? Well, the faithful interpretations of this prompt, that's when, someone tried to write in passive voice, I guess, at least in one sentence. But 80% of stories had an attempt at a faithful approach to this, which is pretty high.
Yeah, that seems like a high percentage. Yeah.
It's huge. When I say that, some also inserted some literal aspects, but the more interesting ones are when people have kind of done a literal take on the anti-prompt. An example might be, the character could be dead and unable to be heard. So we saw a bunch of people like that. One was The Last Word by Ruth Lord. had a character like that. So that's where obviously they don't have an actor voice because they kind of aren't alive. Another interesting take was the idea of being in a cult. So Breeding Grounds by Sarah Story, great name by the way, was just one of the handful of entries sort of explored this. That particular story from Sarah had a great opening line, and it was, the thing no one admits about cults is how nice they are when you're in them. Other literal takes, they just had great narrative voices throughout. So shout out to Laura Fulton for her story Day, which took a lot of risks. It had a real relentless voice throughout, but it's something that stuck out for me, and I think it might have for you as well, Amanda. Is that right?
Yeah, I noticed that one. I think it's certainly committed to that narrative voice, and I think that can be really interesting when you're judging as well, to see something that's just told in a different way.
And Zachary Adams' story, Sacrament, it was quite funny because it dropped a bombshell halfway through that I just did not see coming. So well done, Zachary. I was like, no, what the fuck? Yeah, it was pretty good. And that was a great second read. And an idea that I really loved was a therapist stuck in hell with a grumbling Satan as her client, and that had a cool title too, which was This Girl is on Fire by Tracy Lindstrom.
Go on, keep singing.
Yeah, thanks. But my absolute favourite literal use of not using actor voice this round was in the story Neighbours by Julie B. At one point, housemates phone the landlord to settle a dispute, and then landlord answers the phone with, I'm at the gym, I can't talk, which I thought was hilarious. I want to use your active voice, you get it?
Yeah. I don't know, sometimes I wonder if these things are intentional, because that's very clever, and I don't know, because there wasn't anything in the brief explanation about that one. It's like, was that your intention? I hope it was. I just wonder sometimes.
But I was always clever, and I never filled out that box. Yes. I'm just like, ta-da! Well, look, I'm willing to give you benefit of the doubt, Julie. I thought it was very, very clever, regardless of whether it was intentional or unintentional. All right, couple of title shout-outs to end with. I love a pun. Did you guys know I love a pun?
I've heard that.
Well, so Sam Stilson wrote a story that was sort of set around a pond and kind of chaos ensues. So he called it Pondemonium.
Oh, very cute.
Bum, bum. Love that. Another one, which I don't know why, I just liked it. It just had a hilarious travel article vibe, was 1001 Places to Visit Before the Universe Cools. So that was by Kashish Babubani. And finally, 1, nothing goes in the hole, and 2, no one goes in the hole.
Pay the Jardine.
It could be a flash fiction story, but no, it was in the not quite right normal prize, and that was by Emily Rinkema, and that also had a great line with delicious double meaning as well, which was, we're 12 years old and teetering on the verge of something she's already leapt into. And that was a bunch of tweens that were kind of looking up to this older kid and they've discovered this hole. And it's like, yeah, so the double meaning about leaping into adulthood and also this giant hole. Anyway, that's my shout-outs. They were just some things that I thought were really fun along the way. So thank you so much for all the people that contributed to that list and also the ones that didn't, which I also enjoyed your stories. I'm covering all my bases.
Yeah, exactly. Covering your bases. Well, thank you so much, Dean. We really appreciated your help in whittling down.
We appreciated you craning your neck and reading those stories.
Hope you didn't get any burns or,
on any delicate parts.
Exactly.
It's always fun. Right on.
Bye.
So thanks, Dean. And we'll be doing some more shout-outs a bit later on. But for now, let's go to questions and feedback. And so we'll start with a voicemail from Natalie.
So Natalie's one of our daredevils this round as well.
Hi, this is Natalie Busco from Georgia in the USA, and I had 2 questions for the Longlist episode. The first one is about the post Amanda made about emotional connection and how she can see skill in every story, but getting that connection is hard to engineer. And I would just love some insight into the ways you think you can make people connect when they might not have the same experiences, just how to engineer that in your minds. And the second one is about vignette versus story. When does something cross from a vignette to a story for you? When is it a vignette? When is it a story? Thanks so much.
So, Amanda, the first part of the question is how to engineer an emotional connection when we might not have a shared experience. And this is coming from a post that you made. So what's the background there? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, well, I did find that this round. I found that emotional connection was really important, and it was something that often set stories apart. And, I've talked before about getting goosebumps when I read a story, and it is almost impossible to engineer something like that. And you don't know how the other person's going to receive your story. We've also talked before about how basically, you don't know where the judges are at or what they've been through or how they're feeling in that moment that they're reading your story. And there's no way to know that, really. I mean, we're quite open. So I think sometimes people do try to engineer stories to connect with us, certainly on a humour level and all that sort of stuff, which is great. But ultimately, you're just trying to write a great story. And I do actually think it's possible to engineer an emotional connection, whether or not you know your judges and whether or not you have a shared experience, because we are all human. And I think that's the important thing to remember. So I like to think about sometimes a piece of flash fiction as a universal experience that is made personal. So there are these universal human experiences, and at a very high level, that's love, death, embarrassment, whatever, joy, all of these emotions and we have some deeply shared experiences on all of those things. But once you get really specific and make it personal about a character, that's when we start to care. And this is, I guess, the whole point of storytelling. And this is why character is so important to storytelling in this format, is because it's a human thing. We're connecting as humans. And there were a couple of stories this round that to me were generating sort of empathy for the characters. And that's a part of it too, because it's not just I had this experience. It's, can I connect with someone who's had this experience? And I think that you can, if you create empathy, if you give me insight into why this person is behaving the way they're behaving, perhaps making life hard for themselves, but ultimately overcoming whatever the challenges were, that's always going to be gripping. If we're talking about how do you do that, how do you engineer that, then definitely character's the place to start.
Yeah.
Do you agree?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, first of all, it's a very hard question. You might as well ask, how do I write?
Yeah.
Because it's so broad and it's so nuanced and it's a hard skill to master, and it's not one that I would say that I've mastered in any sense. But one thing that you mentioned there was that there are universal experiences. I actually think that most experiences are universal or universally understandable to most people. There's no such thing really as a truly unique experience. So no matter how niche you get, there are still emotions and experiences that people can use as a analog to what's happening. You can watch a movie that's about a spy and you're not a spy, but you can empathize.
You assume, yeah.
You can empathize with the person who's on the screen because you empathize with them and their experiences, and we can all look at another human and say, I understand what it's like to be human and I can put myself in your position. And use the word empathy, and I think that's important, leveraging that empathy, your ability to look at someone and say, I can imagine myself as that person. And, we get this advice all the time in writing, show, don't tell. And it's completely generic at this point. What does it mean? It means a million things. But what I think it means and what I think is important in terms of developing that empathy is allowing your reader to observe. So removing that middle layer from the interaction between your writing and your reader. So as an example, imagine if your best friend comes to you and says, oh, my boyfriend is being mean to me. There's some level that you understand what's going on and you can empathize or sympathize with what they're going through. But the difference between being told that and, you're all out at a restaurant and then he does something that's really a dick move and you see it in person and you can feel it on her behalf. That's the difference between showing and telling.
That just shows me that you don't have many conversations with women, because when they tell me what happened, I get all the details.
But
it's very show. I get it. It's an immersive experience talking to a woman about shit that's gone down. So that's all I'm trying to say.
But this is talking also about things that you may not have experienced for yourself. So maybe even hearing that, if you've never gone through that personally, that's not going to be the same. You might hear about other people's experiences and you're like, oh yeah, okay, I get it. But until it happens to you or you see it in person, you're not really going to get that emotional connection. So yeah, because we get to experience it, that's how we build, I think, that direct empathy with a character. It's why show don't tell is important. That's why avoid filtering is important, something that we've spoken about as well. And that's why, to some extent, avoid passive voice is important, because it's a barrier. It gets in the way between you and the action on the page and being able to experience what your character is experiencing. And I'll also add that that's why it's important to give us a scene.
Yeah.
Right? Let the action on the page unfold directly. Don't give us like a broad strokes description of an action, like they argued or they had fun all night, because you can't connect with that kind of description.
Yeah.
You need to see the action take place as if it is in a scene. You need to be able to picture it taking place in your mind as you read the story. So a good way, I think, of telling whether you're doing that effectively in writing is to picture that the movie that's playing out in your head based on the words that are on the page. If the story is playing out like a scene, like you can see the characters, they're interacting, one says
dialogue,
one thing.
there's, yeah.
Exactly, as opposed to like it's a montage or it's a flashback or it's a voiceover.
Yeah.
Those elements, like in a movie, they have a role, and that role is to give you information to fill in the gaps.
Yeah.
But there's rarely any emotional resonance to them. Like, you're not going to watch a montage sequence and go, yeah, I feel
I don't know.
engaged.
There's some pretty good montage sequences out there. But yes, they do serve a different purpose.
Yeah.
And I think just like on top of what you're saying, and it's funny that you say it's like asking, well, how do I write a story? Because we're covering a lot of bases here. But yeah, that sensory immersive detail is so important. And another thing, it's on the show don't tell list, but like a subset of show don't tell is never name an emotion, right? So don't ever say he was sad, he was angry, or even sort of a more eloquent way of saying that doesn't work as well as showing that anger emerging, showing the behavior that happens as a result of the words that happen. And that's part of what makes a scene rather than like a montage, as you say. So yeah, there's a lot of different techniques. And I think ultimately it comes down to telling a story and, telling a story well and making that human connection. And there are many, many ways of doing that. And it's going to be different if it's a comedy versus like something quite distressing and disturbing. You're going to be searching for a different way to make that connection. But if you're aiming for that, then I think you're going to be doing pretty well.
Yeah. All right. And so there's another part to Natalie's question, and these are both great questions, by the way. So what's the difference between a vignette and a story? What's your view?
Yeah, so this was a comment I made on quite a few stories this round, and it's interesting how different prompts prompt different issues, I think, sometimes. And I'm never sure if it's like that the prompts have created this issue or it's just me. When you see something once and then you keep seeing it again and again. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I think it's called the Baader-Meinhof phenomenon.
Okay, if you say so. No, I have heard of it. But yes, that effect, I'm not sure if it's that, right? But in this round, I did notice a lot of what I would call vignette rather than story. And so when I say vignette, to me, that's almost a setting of a scene. It's a description of an image. It's an image, right? So, and that image might have some movement in it, but it's very much just that picture. Whereas, as you've just sort of said, the story is more like a movie, right? It's playing out like a scene. There's things happening. It's moving from place to place to place. And we've got conflict and we've got progression of the plot and, usually some character agency where things are moving from one place to the next. But in a vignette, we're just sort of capturing that one moment. And look, that's not to say that can't be an effective thing to do. It's often less effective than telling a story. And I suppose it is that issue of not having that movement, that climactic moment. It's just like we're just capturing a feeling.
Yeah, it is about that conflict and that change to me. I think vignettes can work, especially in short fiction, right? They do have
especially
a place.
Micro.
Yeah, because they can express a mood, right? Sometimes we read a story and we say, this is a vibe, right?
Yeah.
This piece has a vibe. And that's most often because it's a vignette. A vibe can give you a feeling, like a vibe story. A vignette can give you a feeling. At the end of it, you feel something like, might be nostalgia. It might be like a pleasant, cozy feeling or something. But usually the impact of that on a reader is going to be much less than a fully fledged story with a change and an arc and a resolution, which is difficult to achieve in 500 words. It's much more challenging. But if you've written a vignette, if you're looking at a story and like you've realized that it's a vignette, I would challenge to take that further, because a vignette can be a great starting point to develop from, because you've got that feeling in there, you've got that mood, it's evoking something. But now how can you take that and bring it to something that is much more powerful? Defining the difference between a story and a vignette. To use another analogy, imagine you go to a cafe, right? Like the decor is very cozy. You order a nice big hot chocolate. It's got a huge marshmallow in it. your favorite song comes on the radio. Like, it's a nice feeling, it's cozy, it's a mood, it's a vibe, but it's not something you would necessarily tell someone about. Like, oh, I went to a cafe and try and describe it. They might be like, yeah, but then what happens? Like, what are you getting at? Whereas if you're in that cafe and all of a sudden, like, a dude breaks down the door and tries to rob the place, you're going to tell that story to someone. And that's not to say that your story has to involve like a big dramatic moment, but I think taking that vignette moment and developing that into a story, that's much more interesting.
I think it's that crucial question that you just said there. What happened next? Like, and then what happened? And when it's a vignette, it often lacks that structure of the beginning, middle, end. And therefore, without an end, there's not that climactic satisfaction of coming to a place. We started at one place and we're ending in a different place. And I think that's what stories do. So I guess there were a lot of stories that were along those lines this time, and it's often paired with a bit of what we'd call too much interiority as well, where a story's like dwelling too long inside the character's head and we're not really getting a sense of any movement or change or activity that's happening. So again, back to that movie thing, like, what's actually happening on screen? Well, nothing. It's all happening inside the character's head. And again, that's not to say that can't be effective. It can, but more often than not, it's not. More often than not, it is the author sort of feels a bit like unloading, almost like a diary entry, like I'm unloading all these feelings, but I already knew how I felt about these feelings at the start. Yeah. And then at the end, I might eloquently express how I felt, but there was no change within that scene to get from A to B. It was like I was already at B and now I've explained and now I've eloquently stated my position on the issue.
Yeah, and going back to, I guess, Natalie's first question is building that empathy with your reader. It's harder to do with a vignette because your reader is not going through that journey with you, right? You're kind of explaining to them the feelings or the emotions in that setup. But in order to develop that empathy in a story, you need to take that reader along the ride and let them watch the action unfold so they can feel the change. And in a vignette, you don't get to do that.
Yeah, so I would say like definitely err on the side of telling a story, like these classic elements of beginning, middle, end, conflict, plot, all of those very basic things, they are what make a story compelling, and it's at your own risk if you avoid those elements.
So thanks, Natalie. Those are both great questions and ones that I think are worth thinking about just as you're writing, prompting yourself. Am I making a connection with the reader, and am I writing a vignette or a story? Both things you should be asking yourself. All right, so our next message comes from former winner, Toronel.
Hey, this is Toronel from New York City. I have a question around deliberation. How long does it usually take for you to go from your yes, maybe list down to a long list to short list, and ultimately the final order? Are there any factors that make that decision process particularly longer, such as a more difficult anti-prompt? And based on your tweets, it looked like you were able to whittle it down in under an hour for each stage. So did you find that July was a little bit easier to judge than previous rounds, or is this par for the course? Thanks.
All right, so some good questions there. How long does judging take? So we allow 6 weeks, basically, from the closing of the comp to the announcement of the winner. And we usually come in a little bit ahead of that, like
we
by a few days.
peer pressure you into hurrying up. Yeah.
Yes. So 6 weeks, we generally follow the same pattern. We do about 2 weeks worth of reading. We allow 1 week for deciding the long list, the short list, and the winner. We allow 1 week, but usually it happens a lot quicker. Then on the third week, which is today as we're recording, we usually record the long list and the short list, and then 3 weeks of editing before they come out.
And obviously that initial reading, it depends on how many entries we get because obviously the more you get, the longer it takes. And that's why we ended up bringing Dean on to help as well, because it was just getting a little bit unwieldy and we don't want it to take forever. Like we know people are waiting for results and they're already waiting extra time. I don't know that our comp particularly takes extra time than others, but certainly there's a wait after we tell everyone we've decided the winner and then when we get to announce it. And that's obviously because we're doing this. We're recording it.
We think that there's a lot of value in the long list episode, and the short list episode is a lot of fun reading out the story. So
we hope the wait is worth it. But Toronel made some spurious assertions there about how long things took. So I just want to set the record straight. So in this case, he said that it felt like it only took about an hour for each stage based on social media. And it does feel quite rapid right at the end there because we do have like weeks of reading.
Yeah.
And then it's like, bang, and now we've got the winner kind of thing, or that's how it feels. So it was actually 4 hours to go from finishing our initial judging, all of us finishing and just sort of wrapping up that phase, and then to deciding the final long list. So 4 hours of deliberation on that. Now, bearing in mind that we've done all the reading already. So we've already made a lot of comments. We've ranked stories as we've read them initially. So we've already got a shorter list that we're working from to determine the long list. But within those rankings, at least 2 judges are reading each story. And if 2 judges or more have ranked like a maybe plus or higher, then that's a pretty good sign that you're going to be in consideration for the long list. And then from there, we sort of work our way down and it comes to a point of, depends how many there are, but we reach a cutoff point of the maybes and we go, okay, these are the ones that are in consideration. And then some of them are quite memorable and we're like, for sure that's getting in and then that's in. And then others we might have to read again, compare again. So there is that process. And this is just me and Ed at that point of rereading some of the stories, trying to make those final calls between some. And it is a fine call at times.
And sometimes we're a few over, sometimes we're a few under the 40 and we need to like add a couple or cut a couple. And it's some negotiation there as well, like which ones really stand out to both of us or one of us really loves and really wants in that long list.
From there, it then took an hour and a half to get from a long list to a short list. And I would say that probably was pretty quick this time.
Yeah.
And we did indicate already when we were chatting with Dean that there were probably fewer like stories that really obviously stood out from the pack kind of thing. So we already had a good picture of the stories that were probably going to be up there.
And when it comes down to like that last 40 stories, we're looking at a spreadsheet and we've read those stories multiple times to get there because we've had to work out which ones to cut. So they're all stories we're very familiar with and we can kind of talk about with a little bit more information and
yeah, we've analysed them by that point, like pretty deeply. Yeah.
And so I think this time around in that hour and a half, we had 8 or 9 stories that were real solid contenders for the shortlist. And obviously a few of them that were definitely going in there. And then like that final 4 that we had to cut down to 2, that's where most of the time was spent. Like which 2 do we want to keep and which 2 are unfortunately not going to make the cut.
And so from there again, so then it was only 30 minutes for the shortlist order, right, which is actually very quick. And that indicates that we didn't really fight this time. And in fact, I will say at this point, it's the easiest winner we've ever had.
Yeah.
We both agreed.
Yeah.
Like we didn't even hardly say it. Like we both just knew that was going to be the winner this time. And so that does make it easier because often the biggest fight is who's going to win. But in this case, it was, as you said, who's going to make it because there's, about 4 stories that were really close and it's not apples and apples. So it's just impossible. So at some point you just have to make a decision about which story you're going to choose to get through. And it's definitely not objective. It's very much a subjective decision. So 30 minutes only for that shortlist order. And in fact, this was after midnight at that point, but we were both just so keen to find out who was
That's the other factor when we look at time is that we're highly focused at this point. We're just like, we've been reading this now for over 2 weeks and we're down to the final few. Let's work it out tonight, now, even if it takes all night kind of thing.
So I guess that gives a little picture into sort of how the process works. But absolutely, it could be more or less time than that. And I haven't measured it before, so I'm not sure. You could, Tornell, if you want, you can go back and look at my old posts and see the timing. But it's probably a fair picture. I think in the early stages, we also found it harder because we were newer to it. And now the more reading we've done and the more a vibe we get for each other's judging as well, the easier it becomes to sort of figure out where stories land.
Yeah.
And just knowing, even on that first read, this is a good story, but is it long list material? We have a better picture now of what that looks like and what it doesn't.
And look, Tornell also asked, are there any factors that make the process take longer, like a more difficult anti-prompt? I don't think really. For me, that the anti-prompt, once I'm in the story reading mode, that becomes fairly transparent. I'm just like, what's the quality of this story? How does it all come together? What I think is more of a factor is just like life getting in the way and how much reading you can do and how quickly you can do it. So yeah, hope that answers your question, Tornell. All right, so let's get to the feedback from our feedback form as part of the submission form, which, I mean, I love reading these comments once the judging is complete and we can break out of our little cage and go and read all of the other things that people have submitted. So it's always amazing reading all the positive feedback that we get.
I know. And I do feel like there's a little bit of bias in that form because we're capturing people's feedback like in the moments after they've just submitted a story. So
we should have one like just as they receive the prompt.
just to compare them. Yeah, that might be more fair. But no, we really do love the feedback and the fact that you guys take the time to say thank you and to say what a good time you've had. Like, it means a lot because we're doing this for the love of it. But yeah, I'll just go through a couple of the comments or a few of the comments that people left behind, and including some more constructive feedback as well. So I'll start with Gail, who said, "This is a fun prompt. Not everyone can emerge a winner, so creating a fun, immersive writing journey is its own reward. Thank you." And I really agree with that. I think it's such an important sentiment as we approach the long list.
Yeah.
You know, not everyone's going to make that list. And I say this every time, but like very emphatically, that does not mean your writing was shit.
Yeah.
If you've had a great time, if you've expressed yourself, and in many cases, like we've read your story, enjoyed it, thought it was great, and it still didn't make the long list, which is incredibly frustrating. But, you know, making a long list is one thing and it is exciting, and that's not to downplay like what a validating feeling that is when you've connected. But at the same time, like there was so many great stories that didn't make it. So to know, for those of you who are approaching this from a bigger picture perspective, like I'm just doing this because I need to be creative and this makes me feel good. Like I really love to hear that because you're already a winner. We know that. Now, Marina had, I guess, some constructive feedback for us, just commenting about how she's struggled with the anti-prompt in the past, but also with rumours that we don't like sci-fi. And these are probably rumours that we've started ourselves. So it's not like I'm going to dispel them. But she said, "This time I enjoyed myself more. I told myself, fuck it all, I'll write what calls to me. I ended up with something I really enjoyed and my beta readers did too. More of us should take the fuck it all, write what calls mindset to heart." And I could not agree more. As someone who absolutely embraces the fuck it, write what calls philosophy, whether, you know, I know when I'm submitting stories that they're not going to land. It's like, but I liked it and too bad. And in fact, often that's the only way I can write because that's the only way I get motivated to finish. So I think that's an absolutely wonderful attitude. But I also wanted to respond, I suppose, to that suggestion that maybe we don't like sci-fi. So Ed, what's your feelings on sci-fi?
Yeah, we've spoken about this before, and like I'm actually a sci-fi fan. Like I read sci-fi novels, I watch sci-fi movies. So it's not that I don't like sci-fi, it's there are challenges with sci-fi in 500 words. And we were speaking earlier on this episode about, you know, generating empathy with your reader and your character. And I think oftentimes the conventions of sci-fi and the way that these stories are written make it harder to do that. And we're trying to do a lot of world building. We're trying to introduce concepts and that drives us further away from character. So it's not necessarily that it can't work. It's just that those things often work against you, right? Yeah. And so you can definitely write great sci-fi, but it still has to have that same focus because it's short fiction. You have very little time. You really need to home in on character. And sci-fi works well in longer form because you have that time to build your world and explain the mechanics and the science behind it.
And that's what makes it great. Like that's why people love it, immersing themselves in like these epic novels and these multi-episodic experiences of sci-fi. And fantasy is similar in that regard, that you need that time to immerse yourselves.
I think one of the problems that we have, what we often get for a sci-fi story is, again, going back to the previous conversation, more of a premise. You know, this is a great idea for a world or, you know, a situation, but by the time you've given us that, there's very little time to really develop that story and have that change and the resolution, all the things that make a story satisfying in 500 words.
Yeah, and I agree. And look, I wouldn't call myself a sci-fi fan by any means, but there's certainly sci-fi that I do enjoy. And guess what? It's often character driven. And that's in fact why we love the movies and stories and books that we love is usually because of the characters. Like, yes, you might be drawn in by a cool idea, but you stay for the characters and caring about like whose father is, who it is, and all of that stuff is what you end up caring about. So absolutely write what calls to you. And if that's sci-fi, please hit us with it and 100% prove us wrong in that regard. But also I think like probably if you're going to write sci-fi, maybe focusing in on the character part and letting some of that other stuff be in the background a little bit more might help you hit that 500 word mark, that scene mark. Okay, so I also just wanted to give a little shout out to Wendy Marshall, who mentioned in her feedback form that she brought her daughter along this time. And we always love a little family unit. We've got a few of them happening here in Not Quite Right, and we love to see it. I actually do have a habit of dragging my family members in when I'm entering competitions as well. I've dragged both my brothers at various times. I've dragged my brother-in-law. I've dragged my uncle. He didn't need much dragging. I love it. I love to see the family. So hi to Wendy and hi to your daughter. And to Penny Nichols, who said that this is her second round and this time she brought several friends with her. Thank you. We love to have your friends, but also we love your support in sharing the good word about Not Quite Right with the people that you care about. So thank you for doing that. And she said, I love the energy, humour and the chance to do some generative writing with hundreds of writers. Thanks for this. Oh, wait, let me be a little bit more on point with the anti-prompt. My second round with you was completed today and several of my friends were dragged along with me and by me into this raucous generative writing experience. My gratitude for your shenanigans should be sufficiently expressed by this comment. And I think it was.
I think so too.
Thank you very much, Penny. Now, just some more general comments that came from a few different voices in the feedback form. So we got some lovely comments about the engagement that was happening in the Not Quite Right community. So I'm really happy to hear that because, of course, we have to check out of the community because we would know too much if we were in there. So it's nice to know that it's bubbling along when we're not there. One person mentioned that they were frustrated that they didn't get as much feedback as some of the quote-unquote better-known people in the community. And to that I would say, engage more. Right? That's how you get it. So the number one thing to do if you want feedback on your story is to give a lot of feedback. Yeah. So go around as many stories as possible giving feedback. Now, that's not a guarantee you're going to get feedback back, but in all of the writing communities I've been in, most people really try hard to feed back to the people who have fed back on their stories, if you know what I mean. It's like a quid pro quo situation. So do that. Go around as many stories as you can and you'll get a higher hit rate. But also, like, some of these writers in our competition are making a name for themselves by either sort of almost establishing a personal brand of their writing that people engage with, or maybe like, I don't know, doing something wild or just being consistently like delivering cool stories or stories that connect with people. And so if you're doing that as well, well, then you're going to find you get a better response in the community. But, you know, the longer you're there, the more connections you make. You will make friends. You absolutely will make friends and people who care about your writing journey. So stick with it. That's my best advice anyway. A few people also commented on how much they loved the social media posts. They were like, oh, I can't wait, bring it on, but also it's going to be torture. And, you know, we love torturing you in that way. So glad you're enjoying that. We certainly enjoy it. I know Dean gets stuck into it as well, so it's good fun. You not so much, Ed.
Oh, this is just my personality. When I am in reading mode, I'm in the zone, you know, and it does not occur to me to post on social media because I'm locked in. And then sometimes I'll be deep in thought, like, oh, what I thought about this story and blah, 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 blah. And then I'm like, oh, I should tell someone about this. So I don't know. I'm not a Twitter person.
You're not a Twitter. You're very much a TikToker.
I do my best. That's just my personality.
Well, maybe my undiagnosed ADHD is more of like, I need to just bounce around. But anyway, it is good fun and I'm glad people are enjoying it. Jennifer McLeod said, the lack of feedback kills me. I should probably pay for it. And that's something that maybe differentiates this comp from some others, not all, but that we don't give individual feedback to every single person who enters. And the reason why we don't do that is because it's unmanageable. Yep. And if you were on this end of things, you would know why that is. Now, what we do offer is what we call global feedback, right? That's what this episode is. And you will no doubt hear your story and your approach reflected in our comments to come because there are some emerging themes and there's definitely, we hope, something that you'll get out of every episode. Certainly what you'll get out of even the Daredevil episodes, which have nothing to do with your story, but which in fact do give, I hope, a lot of helpful feedback. That's certainly what we hear from the community. Comparing to, I guess, like Writing Battle, in which you get stacks of feedback, which is fabulous. Well, can be. Not always, depends how well you did. But the cost of that in Writing Battle is that you're also giving a lot of feedback. So you spend a lot of time reading other stories, giving a lot of feedback, which is great. If you've got the time for that, that can be really, really fun and rewarding experience. I guess for us, like that's what we're doing. We're reading a lot of stories, thinking about a lot of stories, and it does teach you a lot. So that's really cool. But that's the cost of doing that on top of the fee that you pay for that competition. And then, of course, we've got others like New York City Midnight. You get like just a sort of sentence or two from each judge who's read your story. on the good and then the needs improvement kind of thing. So you'll get like a paragraph of feedback on each side for those things. Now, I guess what I would say about New York City Midnight is that it is like a lot more expensive than our competition. And so they're paying a lot of judges to do that work. And, you know, that's why you're getting that individual feedback of a line or two on your story. So we hope that we're offering value here in our Longlist episodes. We certainly don't hold back in our global feedback. And, of course, in the Daredevil episodes, all the articles we write and so on. So I hope you do feel like you're getting value. But if you do want personal feedback, for sure, like we'd love to give it to you.
Yeah.
It's just a matter of like we can't do that for everybody. We'd love to.
No,
We'd love
it
to.
is very time consuming. And, you know, this round for the October round, you may have seen on the website and in the emails that you received, we've moved from the written feedback and we're trialing now like a coaching package, which is a slightly different format. And I guess that decision comes from doing the written feedback now for a number of rounds and noticing that there is a better way that we could be delivering, I guess, a more personalised experience.
Yeah, and I think, like, I hope that the people who have received written feedback have found that valuable. Certainly plenty of them have come back time and again, so you'd like to think that they're getting some value out of it, otherwise they're a bit mad. But yeah, we're moving to a coaching situation for the October round, which I'm excited to do. So basically like a half an hour online, like a web conference chat, like Zoom. I think we're going to be using Zoom. And what I'm really hoping for that is that I'm able to tailor that feedback even more, right? Because even with the written feedback, we do see these themes emerging. Like there's a lot of common issues and it's not all the same issues all the time, but there are a lot of common issues. But what we really want to get to the heart of is like, what's your goal? How can we help you get to your goal? And it's usually not about one story, right? Because you can't judge a writer off one story that in some cases they wrote really quick. It's about educating yourself, getting yourself to that next level that you want to get to. So hopefully that will be a good experience as well. But yeah, obviously we can't do that for every person. I'd love to. Love to be able to do that. But anyway, moving on. Thank you for your feedback and hopefully we do get to have a personal critique at some point. All right, so more generally, we got some feedback suggesting that the anti-prompt was easier this round, possibly because it was more structural. So the idea of using active voice or using passive voice, like it's a little bit more straightforward than a more vague idea of like kill your darlings kind of thing, which I totally get, especially if it's the first time you're hearing this rule or this advice. And also people saying that the extra information helped as well. So we had those companion articles about A, what the rule is, and B, here's a whole bunch of ways you might want to break it. But also, if you're going to break it this way, here's some advice maybe of what to look out for. And I don't know if you agree, but I certainly felt like people got it more this round. It felt...
Yeah, I agree. And I think the number of DNFs was lower this round as well. People not as intimidated. This round was a lot more actionable. Right, so you can easily break the rule. Always use active voice by using passive voice. Like if it comes down to it, it's much harder to break the kill your darlings rule. It's much harder to break the write what you know
or
rule,
harder to prove that you've broken it too. Like, totally. But I also felt like, probably this article saying here's a bunch of ways you can break it and here's some suggestions. I think that did help some people because I did find there were less people who felt like they needed to go too hard with it. And it did feel like people were paring back a little bit more and having the confidence to just do it a little bit and that would be enough. And I think that's really cool too. Like I do appreciate the writers who go hard and really commit, and that can be really effective. It often can be a stumbling block as well because, again, these rules exist for a reason. So it was nice to see people taking maybe a little bit more of a thoughtful approach. I think absolutely they always put thought in, but how can I make the story work? Not just how can I give a clever idea for the anti-prompt, but how can I emerge with like a really solid story at the end?
And I think in the past we've been a bit reluctant to spell that out because we don't want to inhibit people's creativity and we don't want to say do this or do that and kind of limit people. But I think we've understood that you need to give a little bit of, because people can't read our minds. They don't know what, what we want. So yeah, I think this is a good outcome.
Yeah, me too. Which is a bit sad because we have been talking about how October will be our last round of the anti-prompt. And we've talked about it before, but the reasons for that are largely that we feel like it creates a little bit of a barrier to entry where people who are coming to this for the first time, like it's a lot. Like what does it mean?
Yeah, I mean, there's pros and cons, right? There's pros are it's writing related, it's a great learning tool. It can generate a lot of creative ideas and it's fun. It can be fun. For some people it can be fun. For some people it can be like grueling, maybe at the same time for the same people. But the downsides are it does create that barrier to entry And also it does encourage writing bad stories, I guess. Writing stories that break rules that are there for a reason. And sometimes that doesn't go well.
Yeah.
So what we want to do is make sure we're encouraging people to write great stories.
So one thing that I hope we will continue to do, I'm sure we will, is continue to provide that advice, continue to provide insights into what works from our perspective. So that part's not going to change. But we do have some other fun ideas of how we might approach this in the coming year. So do stay tuned for that. But please do join us for the anti-prompt funeral in October. We're all going to go out with a bang, I think. All right. So this one's for you, Ed.
Oh.
We have had a couple of comments, not so many this time, about the form and the website being a little bit slow to load. Did you want to respond to that?
Yeah, so from a technical side, I think this round was very smooth. There was hiccups in the January round. There were a couple of hiccups in the April round. This time it was very smooth from start to finish, but we still do have some underlying issues with the website. Those issues, unfortunately, at this stage are not simply a matter of like upgrading hosting because we already have great hosting. It's way overpowered to what it needs to be. There's some problems that require like recoding and rebuilding the website from the ground up, which we will do, but which take time. So that's definitely like, for me, number one at the moment in terms of website priority is to fix those issues and do that rebuilding so that the website is a lot faster. And it's not just rebuilding the website, it's rebuilding the website while maintaining all of everyone's account data and, the history there in the forum and all that kind of thing. And we want it to be, continuous and live and not say we're getting rid of the old site, here's the new site, start from scratch kind of thing. So there's challenges in doing that. And it will take a bit of time, but that is first and foremost on my mind at the moment is how I can get that done.
Yeah, he's been stressing about it. And it's because we're trying to achieve too many things, I think. Our website,
we're doing a lot.
It's doing a lot, yeah. But yeah, we're onto it. We're aware. We know it's frustrating, particularly when there's a lot of people on the site, like when the prompts drop. And of course, when the deadline's approaching, it does get slow. And I have a slow computer as well. So even for myself, I get frustrated with our website. So we're onto it. But thank you for your feedback. So we also had a couple of comments about the submission form itself, the actual story box where you put the story in, about paragraph indents and also about word count. So regarding paragraph indents and stuff like that and the general formatting, like, don't stress about it. Like we're receiving your stories in a visually appealing format. We're not looking for things like an indent at the start of every paragraph. It's not publishing quality. You know what I mean? We're really focused on the quality of the story, not those sort of details about how it appears. And then when it comes to word counts, like again, we acknowledge that can be really frustrating because I know some people take the word count very seriously, like it's a personal challenge to get it on exactly 500 words or whatever it might be. But for people who have been working with different apps and document programs for long enough, you know that they don't all count words the same. And our form counts words in its own special way, which is less intelligent than a program like Word, for example. So it might count like an M dash or an N dash as a word because it's got spaces around it, whereas a program like Word knows that that's not a word, if that makes sense. So you've got to leave yourself that little bit of time to edit at the end and double check your entry before you hit submit. Okay, so one participant asked about a trigger warning field, just a bit concerned about not just us, but other judges who might be involved, which in this case is just Dean, but could foreseeably be someone else, and including a trigger warning.
Well, we have a trigger warning field in the community because we recognise it's going to be read by a wider group of people. You might want to put that warning in there. Personally, I don't have a problem with any kind of content. Like it's not going to disturb me or worry me. I don't really have any triggers.
No, and this is the thing. It is a very small audience. It's you, me and Dean, and we're all okay. We've read a lot of stories. And I would say that as well. We're very fortunate.
Yeah.
We don't have trauma that is an issue that requires a trigger warning. And I want to be clear on that too, because I think this term of trigger warning can get bandied about a little bit, almost flippantly. And to me, it's very much for someone who has experienced trauma and who potentially has PTSD around that trauma, that it will trigger a PTSD episode or something akin to a PTSD episode, like some sort of stress response. And that's a very serious issue for people. And we're not in that camp, and I don't want to act like I am. If something is a sensitive topic or it's uncomfortable, and there are some graphic, uncomfortable stuff that we get through, but that's a story to me that's separate from me, and I'm able to separate that in my mind. And so I guess what it boils down to is that we don't need it. And so therefore you don't need to put it in there. But yeah, in the Not Quite Right community, please do that because I'm sure for some people that's an issue. But that's very sensitive of you. So thank you for asking that question, but not necessary for us. And in fact, I was triggered by a couple of stories. I do actually have some trauma. Capital T trauma in my life, but it's not something that's usually like I don't.
It's not triggered by stories.
Well, I mean, it is a little, but not in a way that's ever going to be a serious problem for me. In fact, it's kind of therapeutic in its own special way. Anyway, that's a whole other issue. I'll discuss that with my therapist. All right, so moving on. We had a few people, and we always do, mentioning the time zone issues, just struggling with getting the maths right on the time zone. And it's challenging. We've had those challenges ourselves. And why is it so hard? I don't know. It is hard though, isn't it?
It's hard because the time in Sydney keeps changing every 6 months.
Your time might change where you are. Yeah. And it does. We have, daylight savings that happens for half the year essentially. So it's not even going to be the same between rounds. But we do have the countdown clock, which will appear in the lounge. And so you can check the countdown clock if you're not sure. But we also have, if you click, check time zone or?
Yeah, it'll take you to a website which has the end date like pre-plugged in and you can just select your location and it will tell you.
Yeah, so there is a little tool there already for you. So check out the lounge. We've got the information there and hopefully that's helpful. But yeah, for whatever reason, that just will never compute. Like it's hard.
There is a, look, I really want to improve that experience, but surprisingly, as far as I've been able to find, there's no off-the-shelf WordPress plugin or, maintained simple app because all it needs is to be is like a little clock where you select your location and it tells you, what the time is basically. But that doesn't exist. No one's built it.
Okay.
And so anyway,
someone want to build it. Send it our way.
There's a little niche.
Yeah. Okay. We also had some further feedback on the prompts more generally. Some were saying the prompts were too easy this round, which is the first time we've heard that.
Did they make the shortlist?
Valid question, actually. Maybe you thought they were too easy. Some people were, of course, saying they were too hard, which we do get every round. We had some people saying they were too depressing. Oh. So this idea of burning maybe, and then some were saying they were too tame. Now, to the people who are saying they're too depressing and too tame, I say you're too depressing, you're too tame, right? Like they're just a prompt and you will see from the stories that we got and the stories that appear in the long list and the short list, there's a huge range and we've got depressing all the way to hilarious. So no offense.
And look, I'll also say, this is also general comments. The prompts are the prompts and you have to meet the prompts. But apart from that, you can write whatever the hell you want.
Yeah.
You write the most non-depressing or the wildest story you can possibly come up with. If it contains the word crane.
Yeah.
If someone,
tick.
Burns something physical or a CD or
their vagina.
Exactly. That you're meeting the prompt. It's what you make it.
Yeah, it's totally what you make it. I do acknowledge some prompts tend to evoke certain themes and we did get probably more depressing stories this round.
Yeah,
it's a valid comment for sure. But absolutely, if you don't want to write a depressing story, you do not have to. And, again, back to the anti-prompt, but there were a few people commenting that they're sad to see it go, although for most of those people, they're also excited to see what happens next, and it will be fun, we promise. So I'm really looking forward to that evolution. And then finally, just one last comment, and this comes from Trevor Flanagan. And Trevor said, "Great prompts as usual and grateful for the added clarity that you've provided on what is and is not acceptable," which is really fucking rich coming from Trevor, who wrote possibly the most unacceptable story of all time. It's up there anyway.
We will be shouting that one out for sure.
All right. So that's all our feedback that we were going to get into today. Of course, there were many more lovely comments and we really, really appreciate everybody who took the time to enter that feedback. We read every single comment, every single suggestion for improvement.
Some of them.
I've got one tucked under my pillow. But yeah, we really appreciate it. So thank you very much. But let's get stuck into the shout-outs. Let's do it.
Okay. Shall we start with, as we often do, titles?
Well, why not?
And before we get started, I just want to issue a challenge once again on titles. I felt like a lot of titles could use a little bit of a zhuzhing.
Oh,
you know what I mean?
Okay.
I felt this time around, as I mentioned in the last Longlist episode, I'm really coming around to this idea of the title is an important part of the story. And going one step beyond a placeholder title that just calls out the main element of the story, something that's a little little bit more thoughtful, a little bit more creative, a little bit less cliche, really stood out to me this time around. Sometimes I would browse the titles and then go, I want to read that one. What's that one going to be about?
I would say as a general rule of thumb, and this is probably something maybe we could work a little article on as well, is a great title, but just as one rule of thumb, never ever use a cliche phrase.
Yeah, I agree.
And I say this as someone whose working title for her novel is a cliche phrase. Like, I get why that's appealing and often it's a little bit of a play on words or something, but as a title standalone, when you're just looking at it, it's meaningless.
Yeah.
And unless you have gone some great way into making that title mean something new and fresh by the end of your story, it's probably not going to be a memorable or compelling choice.
Yeah, even just a twist on a cliche is great.
Yeah, like change one word.
Yeah.
But anyway, like that's maybe a little topic we can get into at some point.
Okay, so here are some of my standout titles. You and Me versus the World by Claire Sandys. And that's one that Dean called out for the little map interaction. Yeah, great title. And it, what a good title should do is it should call back to the story and reference the story. And that's exactly what it is. It was that you, Ukraine, me, Mexico versus the world. So perfect title.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's done what we've just talked about, right? Moving from a cliche and making it mean something different by the end of your story. I think that works well.
And a lot of these standout titles are also just, they're a bit out there. They grab your attention. I think it does wonders. Needed to Death, Epiphany in the Face Hole by Louise Walton, former winner.
Most recent winner.
Most recent winner. Like Epiphany in the Face Hole will get your attention. Poor Will Who Was Whipped by B.L. Phillips, which features a whippoorwill and fun play on words.
What? What? You just said a whole lot of words then. I'm lost.
Do you know what a whippoorwill is?
A whippoorwill?
Yeah.
No.
It's a bird. It's a North American bird.
Okay. Is it a crane? Is it a bird? Is it a crane?
It might be. What Can Be Said About a Tragedy by Madeline Dawn. And what I liked about this title is that it posed a question that then the story developed. So it was almost like the first line or the theme stated of the story that was then developed. My Mother, My Space Lover by Harrison Wall.
Oh, dear.
Yes. Oh dear indeed. But another attention-grabbing title. Track 12, Born to Make You Happy, Britney Spears by Christy Hartman. Another one that's Dean called out. Britney Spears has a special place in my heart. I went through a bit of a Britney music phase when I was of a certain age, and I'm very familiar with that track from her first album, I believe. So that brought back some memories.
Mm-hmm. Is this back when you were not a girl, not yet a woman?
AITA for Allowing My Daughter to Experience Consequences by Liz Buckthall. And this speaks to me on a number of levels. As a title, like it's a Reddit thread title, but also I have a daughter and experiencing consequences is a topic of discussion. So this spoke to me on a couple of levels.
And just to be clear, AITA in Reddit stands for Am I the Arsehole?
Yes.
I think most people are probably familiar. I get all my Am I the Arseholes like secondary via like Twitter and Instagram.
Yeah. You just get the best of.
Yeah, the best of, exactly.
The Dead Bird by Danuki Jayawardena. And it links back to the metaphor that the story is putting forward, which is like the dead bird being, I guess, a metaphor for racism, the way that someone feels experiencing it. So that's a title that it's very evocative of like that central theme of the story. Another one that Dean mentioned, Dongzilla and the Doomed Bridal Shower. Let me tell you, I ran to read that story.
Did you run as fast as Fisting Fabio?
It was this round's Fisting Fabio, I think. Mango Buckets by Holly Havers, another one that recalls a central plot point, I guess, of the story and one that is very memorable.
Not in so much of a pleasant way necessarily,
no.
but definitely an evocative way.
Breeding Grounds by Sarah Story, another one that Dean mentioned in reference to a cult. And I really like that title as a reference to a cult, like Breeding Ground, as, cults have got that reputation as being basically there for the sexual gratification of the cult leader. So, yeah, amazing. Another call out to Birds Aren't Real by C.M. Archer, which was referencing a popular internet conspiracy theory that birds aren't real, which I find amusing because
people are weird.
Because people are weird. Anything can be a conspiracy theory if birds aren't real is a conspiracy theory. Fascinating stuff. And finally, The Potential Metaphorical and Physical Consequences of a Sleep-Deprived Writer by Trevor Flanagan. I'm calling this out as a title, but I'll probably call it out also for other of its themes. As a title, it speaks to me. It speaks to all of us as a sleep-deprived writer. But as a story, it features a protagonist called Edward, who has a candle up his butt. So that was an interesting read. Thank you, Trevor.
Did you read it by candlelight?
I read it by candlelight and then I had to go to the hospital for some unrelated reason.
Oh, dear.
So, yeah, that was a good one, Trevor. Thank you. All right. What are your favourite titles?
Well, I have lots. You've mentioned a few of them already, but I'll go through some of mine. So I really liked Into the Woods by Melanie York. And that's Woods, Woulds. And again, like we were talking about, maybe taking a fresh approach to a cliche sometimes, like we've heard the phrase into the woods, of course, but this idea of going into like woods and coulds and shoulds and whatnot. So I really liked that one. I also really liked But I Don't Say It by Sarah Kennedy. And this was one where, and Sarah's a former daredevil, and this idea of "but I don't say it" was a repeated refrain in the story. And so, again, really recalls that story back immediately. And I thought that was really good. I also liked, and I'm not sure how to pronounce this word, but I'm going to say gruiform. Well, it means crane-like.
Oh, okay.
And I didn't know that, but I learned this word this round. And perhaps its author, Yeru Cloudgazer, also learned it this round, or perhaps they knew it already before that. But absolutely fitting in a round that required each person to use the word crane. So thank you for that one. Now, this is one of those ones that's just super topical, and I love this about writing competitions, that sometimes you get those like flash in the pan moments of like pop culture, and that was Kiss Cam's Coldplay and Other Ways to Ruin a Friendship. And thank you for that, Michelle Oliver. And you may or may not be surprised to know that you weren't the only person who touched on the Coldplay incident in this
which I think
round.
happened just right before.
Yeah, right before. We were still in the midst of it. So that's good fun. So thank you, Michelle. I also really liked Here Comes the Bride by Emily Gray. And Emily Gray has done well in this competition before. But what I really liked about that title was the callback to the anti-prompt. So if we're talking about passive language, for example, Here Comes the Bride.
Yeah.
Yes, it's absolutely a cliche phrase, but when we're looking for that passive voice and so on, I just thought that was a really cool starting point of inspiration. So this is what I imagine. I don't know if this is what happened, but I imagine maybe Emily Gray was doing some Googling or whatever, like thinking through or talking to people about what is this passive voice, and then landing on that phrase and then letting that inspire the story. I mean, that may or may not have happened. I've just created my own fiction there, but I do love to see when it's almost that spark of inspiration that leads to the story.
Emily Gray's stories are always fascinating. She's shortlisted before, and she's also been a daredevil. So go back and listen to those old episodes as well.
There's some emerging themes.
There are.
Okay, so this next one is a perfect example of like flipping the cliche on its head, and that is Mind Over Antimatter by Ross Champion. So just by changing that one word, you've got something fresh and new, and that can be quite satisfying. So thank you for that, Ross. I also really liked A Rumination with a View for that same reason. So not a room with a view, but a rumination with a view, and that was Justin Kramus, who was a daredevil in the previous round. Right. And then I really want to say a big thank you to Neve Hamill, who gave us Not Quite Right as a title, continuing our streak. So thank you for that, because we have always had either a title or that phrase in each round of the competition. So thank you for, I guess, allowing that to continue. Really appreciate it. Tom Healy gave us Holly Crossed the Line. And for those who read the article talking about active voice and how to use it, yes, we did include Holly Crossed the Line in that. That was our little example. And that is a little shout out to our dear friend Holly Sadowski, friend/frenemy.
Not to be confused with the other Holly Sadowski.
Yeah, definitely not to be confused with the other Holly Sadowski. But yeah, I love that. It's clear that Tom took that as inspiration and ran with that. And I love that. That's just how like these things evolve, you know, and it becomes something new. I also really enjoyed Burning Angel Feathers Smell of Nutmeg by W.J. Arthur. Now, that is just like a phrase I've never heard before. And very sensory and evocative as well. So now maybe it's the Chuck Tingle reader in me, but I also really enjoyed The Mothman Who Loved Me by S.A. McNaughton.
Yeah.
I don't know if I'm just reading too many of those kind of stories, but I really enjoyed the image that immediately evoked. That was good fun. I also just wanted to call out, and this is one of those titles that just really spoke to me on a personal level, and we'll just see if you feel the same or if maybe like you can see why it spoke to me. But that was Bitches Beware by Erica Charlotte. And, you know, I read that as like kind of a warning, like just personal warning, you know what I mean?
Like it was directed to you?
Yeah, a little bit.
Yeah.
Okay, and then finally, I just wanted to call out this one, and I know you and I had the exact same reaction to this one, and that was by Corey Haldane with It Was Implied.
Yes, I had that as well. Or Implode.
Yes, that title just immediately evokes a Simpsons quote, which is always good fun.
Well, look at the wonders of the computer age now.
Wonders, Lisa, or blunders?
I think that was implied by what I said.
Implied, Lisa, or implode?
Mom, make him stop.
Yeah, every time I hear implied, that jumps to mind.
All right, so thank you to all of those authors for taking that little next step with your titles. They do stand out.
Yeah.
And in fact, one thing I do, I don't know about you, Ed, but like I look at all the stories first, just the titles, and then I might just click through and read the ones that call out to me. Mm-hmm.
I open the batch at once and then I look through and I'm like, I might choose to read that story first.
Yeah, and that can be a good thing, and I don't know, maybe it can be a bad thing. But if you have a great title and then deliver on it, that's always going to be a good thing.
All right, so let's move on to our favourite lines. And I might start with Violet Night by Rota's Block, who had the line, "Oh, and a bit of not quite white." So continuing your theme of references to the podcast, this one had a little bit of a twist, not quite white. And look, I know Dean's called it out, but I also want to call out Have You Tried Manifesting Self-Worth by Jack Lewis Edney. Dean read out the opening line about the heat burning from Meryl's crotch, which is like such a great way to get my attention.
We cannot stress this enough.
But there are also so many great lines in that story. And breathe, Snakeface exhaled. Meryl's legs hit the floor with a thud, drawing the eyes of a Namus twat next to her. Some great wordplay there. From the story, A Picture That Would Be Painted by You by Michael Stone. And the quote I will share, I believe, is the opening line. The last time I took the train from Kitchener to Windsor, I noticed a place where the pines tapered off to reveal, slumped upon a rain-veined bank, an old house engulfed in ferns, its rot black wood buckling beneath the tug of vines. Beyond it stretched peatland all piebald with shining puddles, and beyond that a single shallow mountain clambered into the sky. So some really evocative language there in that story. From Zen by Alexandria Bellani, the opening paragraph. You pick up the living room around your 1-year-old brother, packing away his toys into labelled tubs. He helps, brow furrowed, bulldozer and crane clenched in chubby fists as he waddles around in an overflowing nappy. You hope you're less full of shit. Great scene setting there. Translation by Katie Teagan with the line, perhaps there's just not enough man to go around after all.
Well, that's a damn shame.
Sorry, Amanda. And finally, another little punny turn of phrase from God's Way of Showing That He Doesn't Exist by Caroline Drew. Peering into swollen waters, I crane my neck to gander around, a goose on whom God bestowed panoramic vision. So nice little play on a few different kinds of birds. And we certainly did read about a bunch of different kinds of cranes and
other birds.
Lots of other birds. Really inspired people to...
Well, hashtag fun fact, my nickname in high school was Goose.
Oh, I think you mentioned that on the podcast.
Oh, have
before.
I? It's because I have a long neck.
It's not because you go around honking at people.
Well, there's a bit of that. I do have the personality of a cranky goose at times. That's also true. But yeah, I have been known to crane my neck to have a gander around, you might say. My unnecessarily long neck. On that note,
what are some of your favourite words?
Allow me to have a gander. These are just the lines that got me for whatever reason. And someone else could read this line and it mean nothing to them. And I think that's what's beautiful about this whole writing process, that you just, like that connection that you form through the written word. So this line comes from the Environment Protection and Biodiversity Conservation Act 1999 didn't account for this by Eleanor Menzel. And the line is, "There, you're punishing me. I know it. You're lording over that miscarriage of process, and apparently I'm the only person in the building who can organise a plea of not guilty on the grounds of mens avis." And what spoke to me about that was mens avis, right? Because as a law nerd, mens rea, right, is forming an intent to commit a crime, right? It means guilty mind. And I don't know if this was the exact intention that Eleanor meant, but when we get to mens avis, like to me, that was just bird brain, right? So you form the bird brain. That's how I read it anyway. So that's good fun. Now, on a different note, we had From Kissing the Swarm by Kelly Johnson, and that had quite a few evocative lines, but I'll just call out a couple of them. And one was, "From the perfumed crook of her arm, I watched a crane fly limp across the floorboards, crushed or bitten, remaining limbs twitching sporadically. The daddy longlegs dragged itself usward with broken urgency. What happened to you, I wondered, biting into the shoulder of Maggie's woolen cow neck? And why are you still fighting?" So that was just like a crucial moment there. And then, as with all half-hearted queries to the universe, a crooked answer was soon supplied. And so just some really lovely phrasing there and just evoking a mood. And that whole story, like if we're talking Poe and whatever, like it really did just have a consistent mood throughout. And I thought that was quite effective. Then from Definitions, Bylaws, Policies and Actions by George D. "Well," Crane adjusted his tie, "I am a lawyer." "Yeah, well, I don't need to be a gynecologist to see that your son's a Mr. Barry." So that's the point
That's the point
five.
five
That's
from
the
earlier.
point five we were talking about. So thank you for that, George. And then from Happy Campers by Sophie Thompson, and this was one that Dean mentioned earlier, but this was another story that had quite a few evocative lines in it and which created a certain mood throughout. So I'll just read a couple of those. "Mum had insisted I take the tent on my trip. It was no use to a dead man and saved me spending money on a new one. She'd told me I'd always enjoyed my camping trips with Bill as a child. She'd willed my memories of those summers to be fond." And that really speaks to like this idea of, especially mums, it's always mums, right? But just like wanting something so badly that it needs to be good. And so you just believe it and, you know, you will it and therefore it must be. But of course, it probably comes as no surprise that those summers were not particularly fond. And then later in the story, "I pile them all onto that great pyre of polyester," which is some lovely alliteration for for one thing, but also obviously with the burning action prompt there, bringing that in a really sensory way was really cool. Then from Natalie Miniker, we had, "If I told you this was a true story, I bet you wouldn't believe me." And this was an opening line, which was, "I once read that the average person lies 5 times per day. Amateurs."
Great line.
Great line and really great for setting up a character voice, right? And already conflict and stuff. Like it's just such a great opening. And then we had from Folding and Unfolding from Tess Clementson. "Eventually, she was wading through a sea of cranes piled up to her knees inside the little boat, like a slow, dry, crisp sinking." And it's probably no surprise that there were origami cranes involved in that story, not actual cranes. And I guess this idea of a slow, dry, crisp sinking, and that was the mood, like that was very much the emotion of the character. And instead of just telling us this character was grief-stricken, we get this real image of them being drowned by their grief in quite a physical way. Then in Post-it notes from Ryan Fleming, we had, again, this was an opening line, "There is nothing more enraging and more passive-aggressive than a fucking Post-it note haphazardly stuck to a computer screen." I mean, I think there actually is one.
There might be.
There's one, and that's the notes that you see. I don't know if you get them in men's toilets, but on the back of the toilet door. You ever seen a note on the back of a toilet
Like
door
a
in an
Post-it
office?
note?
No, not a Post-it note.
Yeah.
Like a printed A4 page.
Oh.
And it's like, "Please do not piss on the seat," or whatever, or "please do." But it's always so passive aggressive.
Yeah.
And someone's made a little thing and they've done like some clip art on it or whatever, and they printed it off and sticky taped it to the. That I think is possibly more enraging and more passive aggressive. But the Post-it note on the computer is
I
up
can just
there for
imagine
sure.
you going, "Oh, I can't believe this. I'm going to piss on the seat." And tell me what to do.
That is very on brand for me to be like, "Don't tell me what to do," but I've never stooped to pissing on the seat.
Pissing on the note, maybe.
on the person who wrote it, maybe. No, I at one stage I fantasized about starting like an Instagram account that was just those passive aggressive like toilet notes because I find them so fascinating and so hilarious. Anyway, that's just a completely different issue. But
this has got nothing to do with the story.
If I just bring that right back, that circle right back around to Ryan's actual story, what I really liked about that was that it did speak to me and actually brought up that rage very effectively, but also just this idea in a round where we're talking about active voice and passive voice, like we're going to passive aggressive voice, which was kind of cool. And there were a couple of people that took that approach. And then from The Thing Done to Me by You by Avril Robertson, and the line is, as you ran around upstairs screaming at all the glittering fires I'd lit, your car was my last stop. And from that one, it was just this glittering fires. And, you know, this is someone going around intentionally setting fires with a cheating partner. And glittering fires just has that like slightly unhinged quality to it, which really fits, I think, as well. Then from Elliot in Black by Ginny Rose, we had, she felt a welling of love and protectiveness rise up in her. She squelched it down tight. He could smell it on people. And this was a story involving siblings, and this was a black sheep brother, I guess. I mean, this is very much show, don't tell, right? Like we're getting a picture of these family dynamics wrapped up very tightly into a sentence there or a couple of sentences. So I think that's very cool. And then from What Bodo Did by Freda Antes, we had, the fires fed on the neighbouring villages and ate their way towards ours. The younger children waited for their parents. We older children waited for the fire. And again, beautiful show, don't tell there, like just expressing the idea that the older children know that something bad's going to happen. And that knowing is just like, that gets you, I think, in that moment. And, you know, if you talk about conflict and stakes and whatever, like it really evokes that feeling like of anxiety in the reader then, like, oh, they know something bad's going to happen. We know something bad's going to happen. But there's these children who don't, and we're about to find out. And then finally, from Fold, Burn, Inhale by Elda Orozco, we actually had a few really cool lines in this story. And this was a story, I'll just set it up because otherwise the quote's not going to make any sense. But this was a story about a man whose wife has passed away. Yeah. And she's like inhabited in his mind this paper crane. And so he's interacting with this paper crane as if it's his wife. And the line is, you could unfold me, she teased as she traced his collarbone with the razor edge of one wing. He tried, once. His quivering fingers pried at her seams, but she spread into sharp, parched planes. She wasn't flesh, but a delicate thing, a prison of lines where curves should be. And that to me was just incredibly evocative.
Yeah, so beautiful.
Like such a weird concept, right? Like this guy is like in love with the crane and thinks it's his dead wife, basically. But expressing it in that way, such an evocative, sensory kind of way of describing that really puts you in the scene and puts you in his shoes, and you're feeling for him despite like this crazy thing that he's doing. So I thought that was very effective. So thank you to all of those authors. I really appreciated those lines and they moved me. Some in a funny way, some in a sad way, like whatever it might be, but there was a connection there, and I think that's always a beautiful thing. One thing I just wanted to touch on before we get to the prompts is this little habit that some of our writers have got into of including us in their stories.
Oh, right, yes. I've picked up on that.
Oh, you've noticed? And of course we did mention Trevor earlier. And look,
you're not in trouble, Trevor. It's fine.
Well, I actually was stalking in the community and noticed that Trevor was like a little bit trepidatious about your reaction, but did actually mention that it could also just be, I think it was a teacher or a uni lecturer or someone in his past as well who he was thinking of. So maybe not just you, although he could have changed the name and he didn't. So there's that
It
factor.
is fiction, after all.
But I also mentioned that Holly was called out in Holly Cross the Line and in a couple of stories. Yeah. And look, I must say that Holly didn't go there this time. No. She didn't include you or I in her story. But I just wanted to do a little comparison. So, and look, not every Ed is you and not every Amanda is me, and we know this, but for the purposes of this exercise, I just thought I'd go through it. There was one Amanda. Across all
only
the
one
stories.
Amanda
Just
this
one
time.
Amanda, and there's often more.
There's often several.
So not many stories set in the 80s or with women who were born in the 80s. And that was a student who was needing help with a college application, which is perfectly acceptable thing to do. So Thank you to Matthew Peters for that one. We had, in fact, 5 Eds or Edwards this time, and I'm not sure if you inspired them all, but we had an alleged murderer.
Oh, well, I hope I didn't then.
Yeah, well, I hope so too, because I'm sitting right here next to you. We had a rich fiance whose family has a thing for patting butts. And that was from Robert Fairhead. Thanks, Robert. We also had an Ed who was like a burnout teenager, which...
Kind of true.
Yeah, kind of vibing with that one. We had a writer who falls in love with another writer at a NaNoWriMo event. Have you been to any NaNoWriMo events with Elaine DeGaulle?
I'm not turning into an interrogation.
And of course, we had our good friend with the candle up his butt and a secondary candle up his nose, that it must be said.
Yeah, that's not the one that stood out to me. But yeah, it's true.
Because he was, in fact, burning the candle at both ends,
right.
which is good fun. And thank you for that, Trevor. I had a giggle.
Yeah, I did too.
Like what you're saying is you're not going to be anal about it. All right, so 1 Amanda, 5 Eds, but 3 Hollies. 3 Hollies. So we have our good friend and frenemy Holly Sadowski, who likes to troll us, but I think a couple of authors might have been inspired to troll Holly this time. But we had a Holly Lane, I think it was.
Yep.
The Lycanthrope of Holly Lane by Torrinell, and Holly Lane was the street. So look, or a lane. That may be a coincidence. I can't speak for Torrinell on that one. We also had a Holly who was a hacker who crosses the line, and that was, of course, Holly Crossed the Line by Tom Healy. And she has been known to do that once or twice. So that seems fair. I'm not sure about the hacker accusation. And then we also had a Holly who was a car crash victim, and that was A New Hell on Earth by L.M. Cullen. And I'm not sure to what extent those references were intentional, but they are what they are. So join the club, Holly.
Okay, so let's move into the prompts, and starting with the word prompt, which this round was crane. And yeah, like I said, this round was probably out of all of the rounds that we've had, most centered around the word crane in terms of the responses that we got. And one specific interpretation of the word crane, in my view, or a couple, there's definitely more than a few that came through, but the idea of a folded origami crane was one that was definitely a recurring theme this time.
Interesting that you say that, because I have some statistics here helpfully provided to us by Dean. So I did put up a poll on Twitter and Blue Sky, which was asking, which do you think was the most popular form of crane? So was it avian, as in a bird, mechanical, as in the big ones on the construction site? Or was it, I don't even know how to say this word, I just know how to write it, but papyraceous or papyraceous?
What is this word?
Papyraceous. Look, I just was trying to be
paper.
fancy. Of paper,
okay.
yes, of paper.
I've never heard that word being
Well,
used.
now you have.
Papyraceous.
Right? Papyraceous, yeah. Or was it cervical, which in this case, I'm referring to the neck. Okay, all right. The neck of
Gotcha.
this one.
Yeah.
And so I was asking for people's guesses. So the results came back pretty clearly that most people thought it was paper. And you would say the same?
I would agree.
Okay, and then closely followed by the neck, then bird, then mechanical.
I'll tell you what. I'm going to hedge a little bit, because craning of the neck did come up a lot, and that may have been more stories that included craning of the neck. But the difference is, a craning of the neck is a passing action that can go by unnoticed.
Yeah, you don't normally put your whole story around the craning
but
of the neck.
often a story was built around this idea of folding paper cranes. So that's why it stood out a lot more.
All right. So you're just like backtracking massively. All right. Cool. All right. We've got it all on tape. So most people thought paper like you did. And in fact, same. All right. I will admit it right now. It did feel very origami heavy.
Very papyrus or whatever the fuck you said.
Whatever the fuck is that? I don't even know. But in fact, by far and away, the most common usage of crane was of the head or neck.
Yeah.
Right? Craning to look around. Yeah. But crane, right? Not craning.
Yes.
It definitely had to be crane. And 34% of stories included that. They might have had another crane usage as well, as some did, but 34%, which is pretty high. From there, bird.
Yeah.
Yeah, so bird was next, and there were a lot of birds. And in fact, a lot more birds than just cranes, which was interesting too. A lot of stories sort of featured other waterfowl, not just cranes.
You know what? Sorry, going back to the previous ones, I would like to see the stats of the paper cranes that were folded. How many of them got burnt?
Oh, yes.
Because I think most of them got burnt.
I think a high percentage got burned. And that was, in fact, the next one, paper cranes. But 14% which is still a high number, right?
Yeah.
That's a lot of stories, but felt like a lot more. And I think that comes back to your point of like it was the whole story was about that, or they were a very big and quite visual feature, right? Like and focused on, rarely mentioned in passing, although they were. And so it did feel like a lot of stories. And that's not to say that's a bad thing.
No.
You know,
some
of course.
Them did very well.
Yeah, some of them did do very well. And I think it's important to remember that, like, again, it comes back to the story. Like, was it a great story? And a great story that has touched on similar themes to other stories will still always stand out. And then finally coming in last was Machine, not far behind Paper actually, at 13%. So again, bit surprising to me because I didn't notice quite as many machine or mechanical ones. And I don't think that was even including like the claw machine games. So it was very much just the construction site type. And all of that together adds up to about 84%. So 84% touching on one of those 4 themes. So if you did do something a little bit different, well done. It's not the most important thing, but it is compelling to us when we come to a story that's got something a little bit fresh. But yeah, so I might just mention a couple of the other like unique takes, I guess, the ones that stood out. And so one of those was from Birds of Paradise by S.J. Snyder, which was a very unusual story about like, I mean, it was a bit hard to tell exactly what was going on, but my interpretation was that it was a crane who was like in a computer. Like it was almost like an AI crane that was becoming like an AI bot thing that like
an AI agent.
Like it has a relationship with you and tells you how great you are. Anyway, like I'm expressing it very poorly, but very unique story. Anyway, the person who logs on, their username is CraneLover69.
What a fun name.
It definitely was a fun name and very fitting for that story as well. In Alone and Out Loud from Cara Robson, we had another character. Dean mentioned one earlier who was in a crane pose for yoga. This person's getting into a crane pose to get a spray tan.
Yes.
Which is a good fun. I love to see that. Even like an idea that someone else has had, but you've taken it in another direction completely. So that's really cool. Dean also mentioned cranesbills. So cranesbill is a type of geranium. So a pretty little flower, which is not what I'd pictured. I was picturing like a bird of paradise, like quite an aggressive kind of big tropical.
Well, the bill is the feature.
Kind of thing. Yeah, or that shape, or like sort of like a tulip or something pointy. I don't know. But the cranesbill flower is actually like just really pretty little flower. So I'm not sure what that's about. But anyway, they are lovely flowers. But this particular use of it by Ross Champion in Mind Over Antimatter, I thought was really well expressed. And that was only when she didn't look straight at it. She could see a shimmer of pinks and purples, like a blossom of cranesbills, the frayed threads of the veil. Nice to have pretty flowers, but also nice to use those pretty flowers for a very evocative and beautiful image. And from But I Don't Say It by Sarah Kennedy, we had cranes again as a bird, but in this case, she was referring to crane wallpaper. And I liked how it was used as a feature. So there was some real subtextual detail around this crane and what it meant. And it was in a nursery, a child's nursery. And so it had more meaning as well. It wasn't just sort of casually mentioned. Like it was used
like a key detail.
Yeah, key detail, but also one that was evocative and a bit different. So not just sort of the same thing we've seen before. It was really well done. So nice work, Sarah. We had from Jessica Zelli in 22nd Century Junk Mail. In this, it was a company called Crane, but this particular company sort of takes on the traditional role of birds as, in Jessica's words, nature's turning signals. So it took this idea of like this futuristic technology that was taking on this quality of birds from nature and I guess trying to make a synthetic version of that, which I thought was really interesting. And we were talking about sci-fi and so on before and how to quickly express ideas, and I thought she did a really good job of that actually in this story. So yeah, just a few more unique takes on the word prompt. So there's always a different way of approaching it, like if you just take it that step further, and you don't always need to. If you've got a great idea already, then absolutely run with it. But I do think sometimes like letting yourself do that brainstorming exercise first where you go down some of these weird alleyways like can sometimes bring something a little bit fresh. So I would encourage people to do that.
Absolutely. Okay, let's go to the action prompt. This round was a character who burns something. I have to say I was in two minds maybe about this prompt when you first suggested it because I thought, well, that's a bit limiting, isn't it? Like a character has to burn something during the story. But it actually, it's open to quite a few different, more metaphorical interpretations, like burning the CD, or burning cheeks or something along those lines. So it doesn't have to be something physically being set on fire. So it is actually, I think, a prompt that does encourage quite, I guess, a diverse set of responses.
Yeah, absolutely. And we did see like a real diverse range. And in fact, with one notable exception, like I didn't get tired of it or seeing it. Like it wasn't like the same old thing every time. I mean, certainly there were a lot of fires, but fires are very dramatic. So, and they were very different fires and very different characters and very different scenarios. So, and I know in the wiping out prompt, that language of wiping out really stood out at times, whereas burning really doesn't because it's the kind of word that's just
And you don't have to
everyday.
use, I think people understood a little bit more implicitly that you don't have to use the word burning when you're talking about a fire. Like you don't have to say something
exactly.
got burned. You can just describe a fire or the aftermath and we'll get it. Whereas wiping out, I think people expected that they had to use that wording a little bit more specifically.
Yeah, to really like make it clear to us that that's what they meant. But for me, the thing that did stand out, and we've mentioned it already, was burning paper cranes.
Yes.
And that is a very powerful visual image, which is why it makes for a good story.
Yeah.
And outside of this round of the competition, I could see that being really like that perfect kind of concept, that idea of these burning cranes and what that means. It's very evocative. But the combination of the paper crane and the burning, it was very loud in those stories, I think, because you're pulling those two prompts together and other people are doing that because they're getting the same prompts. And again, it's a very, very compelling image. So it does make for some really evocative writing. But it does, sets you that challenge of now you've got to stand out and rise above.
What I find interesting as well is how these prompts come together and looking at these similarities of the way people's minds work. Like those two things, the paper cranes and the house fires, were like the first level that a lot of people thought of, like this is a foundation for a story. But then kind of branching off from that, there were all these sub-themes that a bunch of people also hit. So when we talk about origami cranes, we're also talking about Japan. So there are a lot of stories that were set in Japan or referenced Japan or included Japanese characters. And kind of as an offshoot of that, we got several stories that were World War II themed because, like, you know, of the Japanese angle there. So it's just interesting how these themes arise from just a few prompts.
I've had this little jingle in my head for weeks now, and I don't know if other people are familiar with this. I learned it in music in primary school. But it's to do with Sadako Sasaki, who was name-checked by a couple of authors this round, who is famously of the story of Sadako and the 1,000 paper cranes. And that's that idea of folding a 1,000 paper cranes to grant a wish, in her case, to be well. And she was a victim of the Hiroshima bombing, atomic bombing, and died of basically the consequences of that. And so it's a very compelling story in itself, and there were a few people who had stories, when I say a few, like literally a few, like maybe three, going to these like memorial sites and looking at these cranes and looking at the images and the impact of that, this human experience, I guess, and this connection. But anyway, getting back to the little jingle, but it's this little song, and we must have learned like how to play like friggin' castanets to it or some shit, but it just, I can't sing, but anyway, it goes, Sadako from Hiroshima. So I've just had that little line in my head for weeks. And look, we're back in the crane territory here, but this is the thing, they were deeply aligned and deeply linked. Yeah, that's right. And so I don't know if you noticed as well, but the cranes that were burning were often being burned in a garbage bin, like a little trash can or a bowl. Yeah. Because you can't just set it on fire. Like you have to.
Well, you got to control.
You got to have a receptacle.
Have it just fly away.
Because you know what happens.
Catch fire and the house burns down.
The house burns down. That's exactly what happens.
So yeah, look, we've been through the burning stats already with Dean calling out some of the standouts, and there were standouts. There are quite a lot of options to be explored through the idea of burning, and you all came up with some great ones, and most of them I didn't even consider. I mean, I wouldn't have considered the CD burning. Maybe after about like an hour of brainstorming, that might have come to me.
So in addition to the ones that Dean mentioned earlier, I guess I just had a couple more that I wanted to call out. And one was The Sick Burn from Lift to the Pub by Elle Cook. And I actually feel like there might have been more than one sick burn. But anyway, thank you to Elle Cook at least for the sick burn. That was one I was hoping for. And that's probably the one I would have gone with if it was me. And then also Dumpster Fire by Charles Maitland. The burning thing was a dumpster. Dumpster fire, love it. Love that concept and that idea. So those were fun. And look, there were a lot of fun takes, and it's hard to call them all out because there really were a lot of very different approaches to the burning prompt. And I guess, you mentioned that like maybe after an hour of brainstorming, you would have come up with burn a CD. Well, that's what you got to do, right?
Yeah,
if you want to branch out from what might be the more common themes, and if you want to find something more original, it's going to take time and effort. You're going to have to like explore that. And I do think if you have the luxury of time in a competition, that first night or the first day that you get the prompts, spend some of that exploring your ideas before you latch onto one, because you might surprise yourself. You might find yourself in a fun new place that you weren't expecting that you're excited to write about.
All right, and that leaves us with one final prompt, and that is the anti-prompt, which this time around was break the rule, use active voice. What are your thoughts on this anti-prompt?
We covered a little bit of territory early, but like it probably was a little bit easier to handle. And I think partly because it's a more straightforward rule, partly because that rule relates to the text itself, like something that you can edit or like know about a text. It either is active voice or not. There's no in between kind of thing. And also we had that extra advice in the articles that came along with it as well. And as you mentioned, like we've sort of shied away from that in the past because we didn't want to limit people or preempt things or put ideas in people's heads. But I do think it did help people to get started with their idea. And then they took it in a range of different ways, which we'll get into now.
Yeah, and look, just generally speaking, I think we say this most of the time about the anti-prompt, but for me anyway, it really highlighted like the importance of this rule. Having stories told in the passive voice, and some of them really did go hard, and whether it's the voice or whether it's a character's dialogue within the story leaned hard into this passive voice, it stood out to me.
Yeah, I do think that's the case. I mean, a lot of people were quite strategic about how they used it, which is great. It's important. Like you want to make sure it's being used for a good reason or that it's adding value rather than detracting. I would say it's almost impossible to not use active voice at all. Like almost impossible if you're telling a story. But a handful came really, really close. And some of those were quite good, by the way. Like they took it from an angle that made that make sense. I would say they probably tended towards more that vignette style because it's hard to progress a story when there's not much action, right? And that's the challenge. And I think that's reflected in the results here. But, I'll always applaud someone who goes hard and really has a crack, because it's not all about winning the comp either. Sometimes it's about challenging yourself, trying something new, being experimental and just seeing what happens, because it may not be the winning story, but who knows what it sets off in you for next time as well and what it inspires. So I think that's really cool. But as you said, like I think there were some usages that were problematic. And so some of those problems that I did notice sneaking through was the more abstract language, like when you're expressing things in passive terms, sometimes it comes across a little bit more abstract rather than concrete. And that can create confusion. So that can certainly create situations where it's not quite clear what's happening because we don't know who's doing what.
Yeah.
And that's very important to communicate in a scene, who's doing what. And so when the passive voice was impacting that was a problem.
I mean, what it does is just create these longer sentences. Usually when you frame something in a passive way, it's a longer sentence. It takes like that moment longer to work out which is the subject and which is the object and what's being done to what.
Yeah.
Especially because we're not used to reading stories in that voice.
No, that's right. And it essentially, the problem that it creates is that it breaks reading flow.
Yeah.
So the reader has to go, hang on, wait a second, what's happening? Or hang on, wait a second, who did that? And that's not great. Like you don't want to break reading flow.
Yeah, but obviously passive voice has its place, and I know in like the documentation that I produce at work, it's used very heavily. Like passive voice is
By zombies or by you?
I guess business writing is a lot more passive because you don't want to be like accusatory in your tone.
Are these just your emails that you're sending out? Like. No, you're right. And it is appropriate in those contexts. And that was part of what the article covered as well, like some scenarios where passive voice is useful. And we did see some stories that did that, right?
Yeah.
So we saw stories that took like a scientific report and made that a story and used that as like the foundation.
Or like a police report.
News reports. We saw a few of those as well. So expressing things through headlines and through more like breaking news kind of thing than expressing as a straight story.
And I think that is really the key to this anti-prompt. Like the challenge here is how do you write passive how to use passive voice and still make it sound natural. Because often, as a judge reading that passive voice, if it's part of the prose, if it's part of the voice, it can really stand out and as a mistake, because it's something we look for when we're critiquing as well. Like, oh, you're using passive voice there. So it really stands out. So having it be natural, like in the case of a news report, that is how they would put forward the news. So that makes sense and it fits and it would not be as noticeable.
Yeah. And look, apart from using those sort of scientific reports and those sorts of things as inspiration, another common theme that we saw, and Dean didn't actually mention this earlier, but this was one that I saw repeating often, which was passive characters. So looking at the idea of a character who doesn't have a voice in inverted comma, maybe sometimes literally, but also just that kind of idea of someone who either doesn't have a voice or isn't using a voice or isn't seen or heard, and looking at that character and developing a story around that. Now, I think that's a really great idea, and this was one of the ones we call it more like a literal take, although they did often also use passive voice as well in the literary sense. But what was really crucial there was making sure you turn that into a story.
Yeah.
So it's not just a character study about someone who is passive and, woe is me, like this is a hard thing in my life. It needs to become a story about change, a story with a climax or a scene with a climax. So that was the challenge there, I guess. And the other challenge with having a passive character is that they often lack agency.
Yeah.
So if you have a character who famously nobody listens to and doesn't do anything because they're so passive, well, how interesting is that story about them going to be? What do they do? Nothing. So that's another challenge as well.
I think it can be a really interesting moment, but it can't be what your story hinges on.
I think it's a starting place, and I think from there you need to look at how do they gain a voice, maybe by the end, or how does that lack of voice result in a consequence of some kind, either for themselves or for someone else. And just because they are passive, that doesn't mean everything they do has to be passive. Yeah. We can have this small moment in a small win or a small little, we see progress. You don't always have to see the end result. You just need to see progress or change in the story. So something to reflect on, I guess, if you had a character you loved and a concept that you loved that was sort of looking at this idea of someone with a passive voice, just making sure that what you developed was actually a story around that as well. And the final little issue I'll highlight, because we're going to get to some of the good stuff as well, but it's worth going through because we haven't even in this conversation really talked about what is active voice and what is passive voice. And we did have that article up about it. And it was a pretty brief article. It's actually a topic you can get much more heavily into if you're interested. And it's certainly not something I would claim to be an expert on by any means, because I am no grammarian over here, but it's quite a tricky concept sometimes to get a handle on. And I think some people did miss it, this round. And some people didn't quite get a handle on what active and passive, or passive in particular, voice actually is. And in fact, we're writing in a way that was very heavily geared to what you could tell that the idea was that they were trying to create passive voice, but actually what they were doing was something different. And so I'll go through some of the terminology, but we're going to have to look it up together. But we had participle phrases, past tense, delayed subjects, gerund phrases, and sentence fragments. And all of these things are different grammatical concepts. They feel like passive voice, but they're not passive voice. They are something else. And I think that's really interesting because I think, it's got the vibe of a passive voice, but it's not quite passive voice. But we're going heavily into it, but we're actually not meeting the brief. I think a lot of people who did go heavily into it met the brief somewhere. Yeah. And so they still did it. They still did it at some point, but there were many, many other sentences in their story that weren't actually quite a passive sentence. And so I won't go into all these other different types of language, although if this is an issue for you, you might want to search them up. But an example here, I'll just do one, which was delayed subjects. So we're saying in a passive sentence, often the subject comes at the end, not always, but there's a difference between that and just delaying the subject a little bit. So I've just searched it up, and the example sentence we have here is, there are many books on the shelf. So the subject books comes after the verb are, but it nevertheless it's not passive phrasing. It's just a delayed subject because the action of being on the shelf is still, the books are still doing it, if you know what I mean. So look, I mean, it's very difficult and nuanced to get into. But yeah, it's something that I guess I noticed and I could pick up. And even in some titles, there were some stories where the title, I could tell that it was inspired by this idea of passive voice, but it wasn't actually in fact, passive voice. And that's a shame because I know that people were trying really hard to get it and it's close.
Yeah.
Close, but not quite there.
But I mean, look, what you've said highlights that there are other things that you should also be of a similar ilk that you should be looking out for in your writing.
I think it's important to be direct, and I think sometimes, and it comes back to that purple prose anti-prompt, but sometimes we can get so caught up in trying to make things sound like interesting and beautiful that we forget that we're also trying to communicate what's going on. And I think that that's really important. And I think you'd be surprised. Some writers would be surprised how effective very simple phrasing can be. If you're telling something interesting, you can be very direct and simple with it. And it's nevertheless very interesting. So yeah, interesting thought experiment. Interesting to see how different people handled it. And I wonder in some cases, how people felt about the final product when they were using these different types of sentences quite extensively, how they felt that impacted their story.
Okay. Well, look, I guess we usually answer this question. How would we have approached the anti-prompt? I'm not that creative. And
that's bullshit, but anyway.
No, I think what I said before, I think fits how I would approach this anti-prompt. And that is like knowing that this is a problematic form to use, how can I find a place to insert it where it fits and where it doesn't stand out? I feel like that is a real challenge to not make it stand out. Even in cases where a character is being passive, using passive voice in that instance is not necessary. It still might stand out. It still might be like, why are they talking like that? And I think that's challenging enough to find one moment that works and also tell a good story. Like, I don't think you need to do more than that.
Yeah.
You can definitely write a whole story around the premise of being passive or active, which is another way of doing it. Yeah. Choosing a more literal interpretation of that. But yeah, I think for me, I would have just tried to find that one moment that fits.
Well, I felt a little bit inspired by this one, and I guess more so by the structure of a passive sentence, right? Yeah. So I was playing with that idea of the action being performed by the subject kind of thing, or the subject having the action done to them kind of thing instead of doing the acting, and just playing around with that idea. And this word just came into my head, and the word is careworn. And that word itself is not passive. It's just a word, careworn, but it means like worn by care, right? And that idea of a character, so it was more character driven, someone who is worn out basically from caring. And just I would go into that character and I would, I hope, attempt to make it a story and not just a character study, but looking at maybe them reaching breaking point, for example, and what that looks like. I mean, is this coming from a deep place of truth? We won't go there.
We've had this discussion about your stories before, and they always feature someone reaching their breaking point.
No comment. I reach my breaking point on the daily, so like that's just who I am as a person. But I guess I was just exploring how the language works and then going from there and just using that as inspiration and kind of going from there. And look, maybe I would have stuck in a passive sentence or some passive phrasing, or maybe I would have used the actual phrase of worn by care. Worn by zombies? I don't know.
Well, that's, interesting approach and not one that we saw.
Yeah. All right, but let's look at some of the ones that stood out, some of the more unique takes, and Dean ticked off a few when we were talking to him earlier, but I've got some more that I'd like to go through, and I'm sure you do too.
So this is one of the themes that we saw come up again a few times, but an example of this was Look What You Made Me Do by Douglas Bauman, who uses passive voice in like a domestic violence situation in discussing the actions that the protagonist wasn't really in control of. So, them describing things happening but not really taking ownership of those things. Yeah,
that was definitely a theme that we saw a few times. Shirking responsibility through the language. A little bit of gaslighting going on here and there. Some cases literally exploding into flames.
Yes. So I'll call out The Mothman Who Loved Me by S.A. McNaughton. And this is one I actually tweeted about. This is one of my rare tweets. Still 3, excuse me. And that was at entry 3144. And it was the third story that I'd read. And this is one where the voice being spoken of is telepathy. So that was a passive voice, a voice that isn't really a voice. And
it's not active, it's not physically happening, sort of.
Yeah, exactly. So my comment was only 3 stories in and already found a creative interpretation of passive voice that never even occurred to me. So that's not one that I'd thought of as a response. And there's a couple more, like you mentioned this theme of having characters lose their agency and become passive and using passive voice in those situations. So a couple of those to mention are Nothing to Report by Gemma Puller and Tiny Houses by Christina Wilson, which both took that approach. Another call out is the provocatively titled My Breasts.
I'm surprised you didn't call that out as a favourite title.
Actually, yes, by Manu St. Thomas. And that uses passive voice in kind of a first-person narrative, speaking about the main character's breasts, basically forcing their breasts into this role of object, like emphasizing the fact that people are having opinions and interacting with their breasts independent of the owner of the breast. And I thought that was a great approach as well and a good use of the passive voice. Crane versus Crane by Penny A. Nichols, one that I believe Dean called out as well. So spoilers on that one. It's about a dead person. And, of course, dead people are passive.
Yeah, well, you can't hear their voice, right?
Yeah.
So they might try and talk all they want, but
they might say that their name is spelt incorrectly, but there's nothing you can do about it.
On their headstone. Yep, too bad.
One interesting interpretation, which really stood out to me, was Community Guidelines by Phil W. Bales. And this is I think a unique interpretation of the passive voice idea. It's not passive voice from a literary, I guess, a writing perspective, but it is a passive way of writing. And that is like online speak, this new way of referring to things that's kind of emerging out of TikTok and Twitter and due to maybe censorship and things like that. So people using words like unalive or grape to refer to things that are very serious and using this as a very Orwellian newspeak type of thing that's emerging.
Yeah, very cool idea.
And then we have, lastly, Changing Frequencies by Anne Wilkins. And this is more of a sci-fi angle. And so Anne describes active voice as the name of a weapon. And we have a character there making the choice not to use it, which is very, very kill your darlings kind of thing there.
So I had a few as well, and some of them have already been mentioned, but I will go through some others that stood out to me. One was Midnight at the Oasis by Athena Law, and now Athena did something a few others did, but I think she did it quite well, which was, and you brought this up already, a character who's using passive voice to absolve themselves of responsibility. So this was a cheater or a couple of cheaters actually going out on the town, picking up, and just like basically, I didn't do it kind of thing. Yeah. Very shaggy, you know what I'm saying? Yeah. It wasn't me. So, yeah, I thought that was well done, well handled in that story, which surprises me to no end from a former winner that they would do something well in their story. Now, I have to call out this title as well, which is The Subject is Acted On, in brackets, by the Device, by S.C. Evans, which is, of course, like what I was just describing, how I feel I would have approached it, which is playing with the idea of that sentence structure, basically, and what that means. And S.C. Evans said, I tried to take the literal definition of passive voice being that the subject of the sentence undergoes the action, then to try and twist that creatively, make the subject an actual test subject rather than strictly adhering to that sentence structure and have them be acted on. So that's really fun. I think that's a cool idea as well. And to start with that inspiration, and then great, you've got like the setup for a story and what comes next. We also had It Has Been Written in the Paper by Leanna Caulfield. And this was about a serial killer whose name never appears in the paper. So we're using that idea of news and how news reports are written in this passive way often, but also taking that a step further and thinking about what that means. And in these stories where it's like erasing the perpetrator of these crimes, like completely minimizing who they are and what they've done by not mentioning them. And I think that's really interesting to take it that step further and have that thought. And Leanna said, I don't think an explanation is needed, but low-key, I'm just frustrated how headlines about violence against women always seem to be written in passive voice, so I decided to write about that. And I think that's really great to start with that inspiration and express those feelings about that frustration. In the shortest siege of a castle, according to historical records that have never been validated by Martini Lynn, we had a passive-aggressive demon. And that was fun. We had a couple of passive-aggressive things, and that included, as I mentioned earlier, the Post-it notes by Ryan Fleming. And I really like this idea of like not only not active, not passive, but now it's passive-aggressive. And I thought that was a fun place to take it. So well done to those of you who went down that path, including those two. On the less light side, I suppose, we had Another Child Has Been Killed in Palestine by Justin Krebs. And again, that's coming back to that idea of like...
The newsreader, the news story.
Yeah, the news story and how it minimises like that human element of things. And that was a memorable story. And it's the phrasing of that sentence, but also in this story, it's about the passivity of that character. And that felt very real and raw, that story about, and I'm sure that Justin would say this, that he feels like, you know, powerless in this situation and what do we really do? And I'm sure that's a very shared experience, not just now, but always a shared human experience of this powerlessness against like these atrocities that go on in the world. Like what can we actually do? I just feel so helpless. So I felt like that was a really resonant place to take the anti-prompt. Another fun one was Delivered by Zombies by Lisa H. Owens with the line, today's packages were delivered by zombies. And so that's just having fun with, you know, what we shared in the article and just that broader writing advice. That's how you know it's a passive sentence, if it can be done by zombies. So thanks for that. That's fun, Lisa. Another passive character we had in Not My Fault by Quinn Fisher. It was a character who's detaching themselves from their job, and this job, it harmed the environment, basically. It was creating all these horrible impacts on the environment, and so they were sort of dissociating from the impact they were having. But then to the point where when they eventually died as a result, and this is happening in the story, they're dying because of these horrible environmental consequences that they're now facing. They're getting sucked into the water and dying. But they're also just completely detached from that as well. Like they've detached so much that they're burning alive and just very like whelmed about very passive, incredibly passive. So that's like taking it to that extreme, which can be really compelling in a short piece of fiction as well. And then the last unique take I wanted to mention was from Waiting for Godfrey by Rachel Green, in which she had an NPC or a non-playable character. And so of all the passive characters, like this one is really fun. This idea, and for those who aren't familiar with the terminology, it's in like video games or computer games where you've got a character who's kind of part of the story, like they're there and they're part of the plot, but they don't have their own story. They literally exist just to progress you on your journey.
Well, they're not a real human. They're not a player. They're just part of the game.
They're just part of the game.
They're there to kind of go through a set of motions.
Yeah, and as in this story, like give you a map or something that you need to progress your story, but they in themselves don't have a story beyond giving you a map. So I think that was, really cool, fun place to take it as well. So, like, congrats to all of those people who had these unique ideas. And look, these weren't the only ones. Of course, I'd love to go through every single story and unpack exactly how they approached the anti-prompt. And I'm sure there were some that just completely went over my head as well. Like, I would not be surprised if you don't explain it in the brief explanation. Like there would be times when I'm just reading and I'm not really absorbing like what you're trying to do. But, you know, if you did stand out, like that's fabulous. That's a win in itself if you've managed to like make that connection and do something creative with it.
Absolutely. Some great ideas were had by our entrants. But now let's move on to the moment we've all been waiting for. So we're going to read 40 names. This is the long list in no particular order. So without further ado, here is the long list for the July 2025 Not Quite Right prize for flash fiction. A Life of Its Own by Freya King, Beltane by Arabella Peterson, Bin Boy by Sam James, Everywhere Around Here is Ice and Cold by Jordan Mark,
The One by Holly Brandon, Midnight at the Oasis by Athena Law, You and Me versus the World by Claire Sands, Happy Campers by Sophie Thompson,
To Hiroshima with Love by Sally Reiser Simon, Checking You Out, Romance at Register 3 by Ella McAuliffe, My Breasts by Manu St. Thomas, Needed to Death, Epiphany in the Face Hole by Louise Walton,
Remember So We Don't Forget by John Schultz. Tiny Houses by Christina Wilson. Why Don't You Die by Fiona Stoffer. But I Don't Say It by Sarah Kennedy.
Sacrament by Zachary Arama. What Can Be Said About a Tragedy by Madeline Dawn. Have You Tried Manifesting Self-Worth by Jack Lewis Edney. The Molten Detritus of a Grifter's Past by Lincoln Hayes.
A Picture That Would Be Painted by You by Michael Stone. I Still Don't Like Swimming by Kathy Prokovnik. The Dead Bird by Danuki Jayawadena. Another Child Has Been Killed in Palestine by Justin Krebs.
Day by Laura Fulton. A Measured Distance by Elisa Coddington. An Open Palm as a Clenched Fist by W. M. Peregrine. Sometimes a Nest is Just for a Season by Chris Doty Dunn.
Mango Buckets by Holly Havers. Lift to the Pub by Elle Cook. In the Air Tonight by Holly Sadowski. Breeding Grounds by Sarah Story.
Rotten Ones by Maddie Logerman. 1. Nothing Goes in the Hole, and 2. No One Goes in the Hole by Emily Rinkenmar. Changing Frequencies by Anne Wilkins. This Citadel Has Been Burned to the Ground by Linda Atkins.
It Was Implied by Corrie Haldane. The Overseers by Kennedy Williams. The Potential Metaphorical and Physical Consequences of a Sleep-Deprived Writer by Trevor Flanagan. And, finally, Fold, Burn, Inhale by Elda Orozco.
So massive congratulations to our long list.
Absolutely.
So these are 40 out of 340 that have risen to the top.
You should be very, very proud of yourselves. It was very tough and you made it through.
So all our long listers are contenders for the prize money, for the trophy and publication, and we'll find out who the winners are, who the shortlists are on the next episode. But even if you're not on the long list, you may still be a contender for the wild card. So we'll be reading all of the shortlisted entries, the top 6 stories, including the winner, on the next episode, which is the shortlist episode, which is a lot of fun even if you don't make the list.
Yeah, like if you did make the long list, you've got a little badge. So if you go onto the honor roll section of the website, you will see your name and your story up there in the honor roll, and you can download the badge or copy it. And if you'd like to, you can share it to social media, get it tattooed on your person, print it off, put it under your pillow, whatever it might be that helps you feel validated, please, by all means. But even if you didn't make the long list, we've got a special little badge there just for you as well.
So that's on the website right now. You can go check it out. And, what's coming up next? We've got our shortlist coming up in probably about a week's time. We've got our Daredevils hot on the heels of that, 5 Daredevils episodes, one after the other. And we've also got a regular episode coming up. It's our episode 23, our strangely named 100th episode. That'll make much more sense when you listen to the episode. So keep an eye out for that.
If you purchased a critique for this round, they'll be coming out not soon because we're very slow with those. So they'll be coming out just shortly before the October round. And absolutely get in touch if you want more information about that. But do just hang tight because they do take time and effort and love and care to put together. And so they'll be with you as soon as possible.
And look, the other thing we're looking forward to is Flesh Fiction, which as of the time of recording is still got a week left. But as of the time you're listening to this, it will have closed.
So too late.
Yeah, so I'll be very keen to get stuck into those entries. I've
all right.
just this morning finished my first draft. So I'm really looking forward
you're ahead
to
of me. I'm in big trouble.
That one.
I'm in big trouble. But yes, very, very excited about that one. I don't know where we're going to find the time to read those stories, but anyway, we're going to have to make it happen.
But we also have guest judges.
We do.
Helping us
So we
out on
got some more help this time, which is going to be sorely needed, I think. And thanks to those
sorely needed with a K.
Did you do the hand gestures to go with that?
Sure
Jesus. Oh, God. If we had a HR department, I'd be running there so fast. But, we've also got the October round. So if you haven't had enough writing fun, then please join us in October. Do bring your friends. We love having you and we love this competition. And it will be the funeral for the anti-prompt. So if you have loved the anti-prompt, then, just cancel your plans. Just whatever it is. You're getting married, it's fine. Just cancel it. Just postpone it or whatever. Yeah, it's good.
It's easy to change the date of your wedding. It's fine.
Totally. We'd love you to join us for that because we want to go out with a bang and I'm sure you do too. But, ultimately just a huge thank you to everyone who entered. And I do acknowledge it's always a little bit disappointing if you didn't hear your name on that list. It's a bit of a heart sink moment, especially if you were in love with your story. But to reiterate once again, it was bloody close. And we'll be able to tell you if you're someone who has a critique, we'll be able to tell you just how infuriatingly close you got in some cases. But, I think it's pretty safe to assume that you write well and that you write beautifully and that in this particular case, maybe it was an issue of story or maybe it was just an issue of connection for us. And maybe we're just idiots. That's also a possibility, strong possibility in some cases. So don't rule that one out. But really, huge thank you because we enjoyed your story and it's a win just to submit. But also, not just thanks for entering, thank you for supporting us because you're not just entering a story into this, black hole. It's coming to us. Yeah. And it feels like a gift, It
does.
And I really appreciate every single person who invests their time. It's not just about, I'm going to go and I'm going to win. It's we're just making human connection here.
Yeah.
And I love it so much. So, yeah, I really appreciate the time everyone invests into this and the heart and soul as well and the ego that gets invested. Just a love fest.
So that's it for our long list episode, but we'll be back very soon with the short list. So excited for that. Can't wait to read out those stories and reveal the winner.
I can't wait either. I've been anxious to get the news out. So,
but until then, ride on.
Ride on.
Thank you for listening to Not Quite Right. If you'd like to reach us via email or follow us on social media, you can find all the links on our website, notquiterightpodcast.com. That's WRITE. And if you enjoyed the show, we'd love it if you could leave us a 5-star review on your favourite podcasting app.
Something doesn't seem quite right.
So, Amanda, the time has come to reveal our vague tweets. Now, I've only got 3 vague tweets this round, as we've established. It's not really my thing. But one of them I've already revealed, and that's entry 3144. Only 3 stories in, I've already found a creative interpretation of passive voice that's never occurred to me. And that one, as I mentioned, is The Mothman Who Loved Me by S.A. McNaughton. My second tweet was 1 batch down, 3 maybe pluses, and no yeses at this stage, but 1 very suspicious entry that's giving ChatGPT. Now, I'm not going to mention which one that is.
I was on the edge of my fucking seat then.
I'm not going to mention that one. But look, there were a couple of suspicious entries, and I don't think we've really gone in and tried to...
I had a little looky-loo, but I couldn't really
None of them made the short list. None of them made the long list, so it's not really worth looking into. And my third and final tweet was a very uncomfortable response to the burning prompt. It's a yes from me. and that was, as you probably guessed, I Still Don't Like Swimming by Kathy Prokovnik, and that was the one that included a vagina burning. So I'll read the quote, actually. I don't think we read it during the episode.
Please do.
He was right. Those childbearing hips. They'd been mentioned before, how lucky to even be looked at with such hips. Then all thought was lost to staying upright while he removed the indenting bikini bottoms and fucked her there against the side of the pool, where anyone could see them and the water. What of the thick rubbing water? Her vagina burnt, but she was no warmer.
Very uncomfortable indeed.
All right, but you've got a lot more.
I do.
So go for it.
Well, I'll spare everyone the numbers and I've replaced with names and story titles. I'm going to read them in roughly chronological order. I don't have time to read right now, day job, so I quickly ran through the titles instead. Shout out to Neve Hamill for keeping tradition alive with Not Quite Right, Michelle Oliver for keeping it topical with kiss cams, Coldplay and other ways to ruin a friendship, and Kevin S for keeping it so lowbrow your eyes must have been closed with Dongzilla and the doomed bridal shower. Then lovely use of subtext and repetition in But I Don't Say It by Sarah Kennedy. This is a writer who knows what they're doing. Hi, Sarah. You know what you're doing. And absolutely love learning new words when I'm judging the Not Quite Right prize. Thanks to Yeru Cloudgazer with Gruiform. Not only did you teach me more than one new word, you also managed to stick the landing and not stick the landing at the same time.
So that was the one that we talked about in the episode, right? Crane-like.
Exactly. And Yeru will know what I mean by that. Sticking the landing and not sticking the landing, I hope. Back at the Not Quite Right prize judging today, and first story off the starting blocks, the potential metaphorical and physical consequences of a sleep-deprived writer is quintessentially not quite right. That is to say, Trevor Flanagan, you're in big trouble. And 2 stories in a row have very similar story structures. It's quite uncanny. Autumn Bettinger and Katie Teagan, you guys were riding the same wavelength this round for sure. Both stories involve death of a loved one and an ominous or meaningful bird crane stepping in right at the last minute.
It's funny how we get those patterns, isn't it?
Yeah.
Like you'll encounter 2 stories in a row about some weird
very
subject.
specific thing. It's cool. I love that. Sometimes I wonder, like, this is totally stupid, but like, is our system like grouping them somehow? Like, is it, when it gives a random number, is it like
is the
making
universe
a judgment?
intelligent?
All right. And 2 stories in a row with strong garbage-related themes as well. So neither of which were garbage, it has to be said. But will Sam James and Charles Maitland find themselves on the long list or the cutting room floor? And I suppose it was one each, but I have to say, they were both great stories. Okay, just landed on a story that absolutely delivers on its title, and that was The Fire Wasn't Started by Us by Alison L. Robson. It was a Billy Joel reimagining, and it was good fun. In fact, I think Dean wrote something very much like it for Furious Fiction a while back, like for the comms around Furious Fiction. Again, a couple of people on the same wavelength there, just separated by time. Next, what the actual bleep? I feel like frickin' Frankenstein over here creating monsters. For the record, I'm as impressed as I am horrified by Melanie Talbot. And that was the story where it was raining frogs. Do you remember that one?
Yes, I do.
Yeah, very horrifying and very visceral. Yeah. There are quite a few entries this round which are more character study or vignette than story. And we talked about that in the episode. Normally this is fatal, but An Open Palm as a Clenched Fist by W.M. Peregrine delivers on so many other points that it may have just saved itself.
Yes, it did.
Hey!
Made the long list.
Okay, so just encountered my first Holly Sadowski fanfic, and that was Holly Crossed the Line by Tom Healy. Seems like you're not the only one who can play this game. I'm not sure if I can speak for Tom there, but anyway, that was a character called Holly. It's been a while, but I finally landed on another solid yes. I can tell you that this story involved a craned neck. Let's see if the other judges agree with my assessment. And that was Madeline Dawn with What Can Be Said About a Tragedy. Shout out to the author who name-checked Sadako Sasaki. Don't tell me if it was you. Funny that I should stumble on that story shortly after mentioning her myself. I guess it was inevitable. And that was John Schultz with Remember So We Don't Forget. But there actually ended up being a couple of more mentions. So, again, same wavelength, a little bit more explicable this time.
Yeah, linked into the prompt.
Yeah, exactly. Day by Laura Fulton shared a number of the same issues that have caused me to mark stories down, but it displayed such a bold, creative and unique take on the anti-prompt that I just can't overlook it. Marking it up to give it a fighting chance. Let's see what the guys think. And the guys thought it also worthy of the long list because that's where it ended up.
Very memorable story.
And this round's story idea I want to steal goes to Phil W. Bales with Community Guidelines. And that was a story about police for hire, which was just very Black Mirror vibe. I've just encountered what are probably my favourite character names of any story I've read ever. And that was Kerry Goldsworthy with Jim Sesh.
Yes.
So thanks for that, Kerry. I really appreciated that
It was Nigel, and who was the other one?
Nathan. To be clear, it's Nigel with a K and Nathan with a K.
We worked with a Nathan. He would have been a lot cooler if he spelled his name with a K.
I think it would have taken a bit more than that. Hi, Nathan, if you're listening. All right, and more goosebumps from and I'm not going to name it, but it's actually our 5th place story. So they'll find out in the next episode. But I also went on to say, I'm not sure if it's just my mood today or if I have ESPN like Karen from Mean Girls and I'm experiencing a deep emotional connection with the writer across time and space. Either way, it's a lovely story. Let's see if the boys agree. And clearly they did. Again, 5th place story. So that was you, and you'll find out soon. All right. You guys, I'm 2 stories in and I've assigned my first yes, and that was our second place story. And
Wow.
again, I won't be revealing that name, but it has a somewhat creative format that breaks a few of my personal rules. But the landing was not only stuck, it gave me goosebumps. What can I say? I'm a romantic at heart. Mysterious.
Mysterious.
And finally, switching from day job to daydream over here. Open, and this was another shortlisted story. So again, I'm not going to name it. My comments, simply, holy shit. I have a feeling it will land on the shortlist, but only time and more reading will tell. I can tell you the story featured a paper crane. That should narrow it down. Oh. So, yeah, it did end up on the shortlist. Well
It certainly
predicted
did.
by me. That my own judgment. So, anyway, good fun, and thanks for inspiring us to share our thoughts.
Can't wait to reveal them all next week.
Stick around.